several survivors were bound next to the water tank, awaiting a pig-like slaughter. They listened to the man beside them sharpening his knife with a menacing sound, filling their hearts with fear. Another man stood behind, wielding a baseball bat and gesturing. In the previous episode, Rick and the others who were captured were brought to this place. The massacre began from left to right. The sight sent chills down the remaining survivors' spines. Is today going to end like this? The way they killed people was no different from slaughtering pigs. Glenn was the fifth in line, feeling restless and uneasy. Rick remained composed on the surface, but the weapon hidden in his pant leg had already slipped into his hand. What he needed now was time. At that moment, Gareth walked in. He came to register the amount of ammunition used by his subordinates. Glenn watched as the person next to him fell, realizing that his turn was next. The brutality of this method of death was terrifying beyond imagination. Just as the man was about to strike, the other man might have been firing a gun for the first time. He can't remember how many shots he took. It also kept Glenn alive. At that moment, Bob made a desperate whimpering sound, indicating his desire to talk to Gareth. For him, death itself wasn't terrifying. It was the fear of waiting for death. Bob anxiously pleaded, "Please, there's no need for this. We can resolve this peacefully. We have a companion who knows how to cure the zombie virus. He has a solution. Just send him to Washington. There's really no need to do this. We can save the world and restore it to its former state." Gareth shook his head and forcefully stuffed the cloth back into Bob's mouth. Even if it were possible to return the world to its previous state, he wasn't willing to do so. Then, he removed the cloth from Rick's mouth and asked, "We saw you carrying a bag into the woods, but it was missing when you arrived here. We couldn't find it. What was inside?" Rick stared blankly at him, not uttering a word. Gareth didn't show anger but instead pulled out a dagger. He forcefully dragged Bob closer, indicating that if he didn't speak now, Bob would meet a gruesome death. Gareth had already guessed that the bag contained numerous weapons, which were Rick's backup plan. Rick compromised and said, "I'll take you to it. See for yourself what's inside." His intention was to assess if there was any chance for a counterattack. However, Gareth wasn't fooled. Instead, he pointed the dagger at Bob's eye. Rick then spoke up, revealing the contents of the bag: an AK-47 rifle, an automatic rifle with night vision, a compound bow, and a red-handled machete. Speaking of which, Rick said he was going to kill him with this knife. Gareth chuckled. Finding Rick's threat absurd, he considered them all lambs awaiting slaughter and saw their attempt to kill him as delusional. Without further ado, he gagged Rick again. Gareth stood up, preparing to leave, and ordered his henchmen to put them in the drying machine within 2 hours. In the coming days, they would feast on their flesh. The two henchmen quickly agreed to carry out the orders. At that moment, several gunshots could be heard from outside. Gareth quickly inquired about the source, but it didn't hinder the executioner from continuing the massacre. Just as they were about to strike again, more gunshots echoed through the air. This distraction presented an excellent opportunity for the group. What the hell is going on here? It all started a few hours ago. Tyreese and Carol, delayed on their journey, had only just arrived near the final destination. Suddenly, they heard movement from the forest behind them. It turns out to be a zombie, and Carol rushes in and kills it with a single slash. However, as she stood up, she discovered a horde of zombies emerging from the woods. Not daring to stay, they quickly picked up Judith and rushed to the other side of the forest, taking cover behind a slope to observe the zombies' movements. What they didn't expect was for the zombies to start coming in their direction. Just as they were about to retreat further, the sound of fireworks and gunshots erupted in the distance. The zombies immediately changed their course, following the railroad tracks. A few minutes later, all the zombies had been lured away from their location. Being cautious, the two speculated. Either someone is attacking the end station or the end station is attacking someone else. It is necessary to find out what this is all about. Otherwise, lives could be lost. In front of a small house, a man was setting up fireworks with the intention of luring the zombies away from Terminus. As he arranged the fireworks, he engaged in conversation with his teammates, mocking the woman with the knife and claiming she thought she was a warrior. He even mentioned his plans to draw blood from the boy wearing a hat. Suddenly, a gun was pressed against his head, and the person behind it was none other than Carol and Tyreese. They had overheard his derogatory remarks and discovered that Michonne and Carl were in their custody. The man tried to defend himself, saying they could have whatever they wanted, and that their group welcomed everyone, but Carol wasn't interested in his empty words. They promptly tied up the man and threw him into the house. He stated that your men went to the terminal and attacked us, and that's why they were arrested. They were acting in self-defense. Carol, however, didn't believe a word he said. The man continued, explaining that he had come out to divert the zombies, which would benefit everyone, but Carol countered that the zombie horde was actually making its way to the Terminus. She expressed that she didn't want to lure them away but instead needed the help of the zombies. Immediately, she packed her things and prepared to go for the rescue. Man taunted her, saying that the place was a fortress and she would be killed before she even got close. Carol didn't respond. She simply instructed Tyreese to watch over the children while she went to kill. The man's words had actually reminded her of something. She decided to disguise herself and blend in with the zombie horde. After a while, Carol arrived at the fence and heard voices coming from below. She looked down and saw Rick and the others being tied up and taken away. Judging by the situation, they were definitely in a bad place. Carol didn't rush to open fire. Instead, she changed her position. Some of the zombies had already reached the Terminus. She put down her sniper rifle and picked up the 8x magnification scope on her rifle to observe the situation. Several women were inside the fence, killing zombies. What she hadn't expected was that there was a gas cans next to it, with a large number of men inside, and it was useless to shoot one or two people rashly. At this moment, the women started screaming as countless zombies approached the destination. It was truly a golden opportunity. Carol quickly prepared her cloud-piercing sword and aimed down again. Her goal was to ignite the gas tank and lure the zombies inside. She fired 2 shots without any effect. Fortunately, the third shot successfully punctured the gas tank, releasing highly flammable and explosive gas. Carol quickly ignited the cloud-piercing arrow. Immediately, a massive explosion resounded in all directions. It not only destroyed the fence but also attracted more zombies to come. It was Carol's action that gave Rick and the others a chance to catch their breath. They too were shaken and thrown off balance by the explosion. Gareth realized that something had gone wrong. He quickly ordered the two to stay there while he went out to investigate. Rick, taking advantage of this opportunity, frantically cut the ropes. The two of them were now unsure whether to go out and provide support or stay to finish the pig slaughter. Just as they were arguing, Rick launched his counterattack. In Rick's hands, the piece of wood became a deadly weapon. The man tries to beg for mercy, but Rick is not the one to go soft. After dealing with the man, Rick quickly untied Daryl and the others. Meanwhile, the sound of gunfire outside continued as hordes of zombies stormed in. Carol, disguised as a zombie, blended in among them. When she noticed someone shooting in their direction, she swiftly slipped into a nearby house and took aim at a distant target. Rick and the others speculated that they were being attacked from outside, which presented them with a perfect opportunity. They armed themselves and prepared to leave. However, they came across a room that left them utterly horrified. It turned out that these madmen treated people like pigs, even using human flesh as their source of food. Without wasting time cursing these monsters, their top priority was to rescue the others. They arrived outside, where a large number of zombies roamed, and some people were shooting and killing them. Assessing the situation, Rick disregarded the objections of others and charged forward. He was determined to find an opportunity to eliminate these people. Soon the men with guns were shooting while walking towards the front. Rick patiently waited for the right moment, until the last person passed by. Finally, he took action, rushing forward to eliminate the man and seizing his rifle, firing frantically towards the front. Meanwhile, Carol entered a room filled with stored items and unexpectedly spotted a familiar wristwatch. It was the one she had given Rick before she left. Next to it was Daryl's crossbow. Could it be that they had already fallen victim to these attackers? Rick had made his way to a shipping container, opening the door and calling for the others to come out quickly. With that, Daryl and the others escaped, eventually climbing over the fence. The battle at the final destination had come to an end. Rick then went to the area where the weapons were kept and there he began to dig quickly. Abraham didn't understand why they needed to stay there. Angered, Rick declared that they would encircle the perimeter and eliminate the remaining people. They didn't deserve to survive. The others looked at each other. Glenn stated that it was over here and there was no need to engage in further bloodshed. Rick strongly condemned the cannibalistic behavior and insisted on killing them all. However, Rosita and Maggie voiced their opposition, believing that the Terminus had already been destroyed, rendering it unnecessary to concern themselves with those people. Although Daryl remained silent, he firmly supported Rick, but at that moment, he turned his head and caught sight of Carol. Daryl rushed towards her, and the two embraced tightly. It had been a long time since they last saw each other. The rest of the group approached with smiles on their faces. Rick, feeling somewhat guilty, asked if it was Carol who had done what happened earlier. Although she didn't say a word, the answer was already apparent. It could be said that Carol's timely return had not only saved Rick's daughter but also rescued Rick and the others. Since the eschatology, her transformation has likely been the greatest among them, from being a wife subjected to domestic violence for years to now venturing alone to the base to rescue people. Carol said to Rick, "Follow me. There's a surprise waiting for you." Subsequently, Carol led a few people to the cabin. Rick went crazy as he rushed forward when he saw Tyreese holding Judith. His daughter was still alive. Tyreese and Sasha hugged each other, feeling the disbelief that they had both thought they had lost each other forever. They never imagined they would reunite today. Rick, in particular, could not imagine who would have saved his child at that time. He was overwhelmed with gratitude towards Tyreese. Finally, Rick decided to leave this place, although he didn't know where to go. The farther away from here, the better. The team set off once again, embarking on the journey to find a sanctuary. Rick covered up the advertising information to prevent other survivors from coming. This is Rick's team. They leaving the Terminus. They don't have a specific destination in mind and just want to get away from this area. At that moment, they hear a distant cry for help. Rick immediately becomes cautious and on guard. Initially, he didn't want to meddle, but with his son urging him, he reluctantly agrees to go and investigate. They find a man trapped on a rock, surrounded by several zombies, frantically pleading for help. Rick and his team swiftly move in, displaying remarkable teamwork, and eliminate all the zombies in less than a minute. The man came down and started throwing up without saying a word, leaving everyone speechless. After recovering, the man expresses his gratitude and introduces himself as Gabriel. During their conversation, they learn that Gabriel has a church nearby and let him lead the way. They've been gone so long. Rick's group decides it's time to find a place to rest. On the way, Gabriel explains that since the eschatology began, he has survived by relying on the supplies at the church and rarely venturing outside. However, he ran out of food, which is why he ran so far. Soon, a distinctively styled church appears before them. Due to Rick's cautious nature in the post-apocalyptic world, he stops Gabriel from opening the door and decides to inspect the church himself. Inside, it's eerily quiet, with no signs of anyone around. Rick meticulously checks every compartment. Apart from the normal church facilities, there doesn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. It appears that Gabriel, the man they encountered, wasn't lying. Rick immediately decides to rest and recuperate in this location. However, Abraham remains focused on their to Washington and disagrees with staying at the church. In the backyard, he discovers a car that can be fixed and used, but Rick's priority was to give his team a break. The original members of the group strongly support Rick. Even Glenn states that they should be in sync with Rick's decisions and can put off going to Washington for a while. Gabriel informs Rick that there is food nearby, but it's infested with zombies, and he's too afraid to go alone. Rick promptly decides to take a team to scavenge for supplies. He finds Carl and tells him that he doesn't fully trust Gabriel, so they'll bring him along on their expedition. Rick suspects that Gabriel might have other companions. He instructs Carl and the rest to remain vigilant and protect his sister while they're away. Rick knows that with a larger group, Son's guard is starting to drop, and he might even be deceived by appearances. After ensuring his son's understanding, Rick and the others set off. While on the road, Bob proposes the idea of heading to Washington, D.C. to Rick. Abraham is also very strong in combat. Eugene's knowledge can help prevent further disasters and restore life to its former state. Bob advises Rick not to become too numb to the world, otherwise it's hard to go back to life as it was before the end of the world. However, Rick simply said that this is now the reality of life. But Bob always believed that Eugene represented the military. He had decided to follow Abraham and the others to Washington. Rick remains silent and does not interfere with the decision of others. Protecting his son and daughter is his first priority. Soon, the group arrives at a store to gather supplies. Although the process is perilous, with Bob being dragged into the water, no one is harmed. Brought back a lot of supplies. Not a bad haul this time. Upon returning to the church, Abraham is busy repairing the car, while Carl notices some strange signs within the church. The windows are marked with knife scratches, indicating someone's strong desire to get inside. In addition, there is a row of inscriptions on the wall that reads, "You will go to hell for this." Carl becomes suspicious of Gabriel after considering his father's words and observing these signs. Night. Everyone gathers around, enjoying the feast they brought back. It has been months since they had a proper meal, and now they can even have a drink or two. Abraham continues to express his thoughts, asking if they want to wake up every day and fight zombies. scavenge for food, and be unable to sleep peacefully at night. Rick knows that Abraham is trying to persuade others to join him in escorting Eugene. Abraham even asks Eugene to explain what Washington has to offer. Eugene clears his throat and says that the military has established a base there, equipped to handle any crisis. They have food, fuel, and shelter, a chance to start over. Everyone contemplates the tempting proposition. No one wants to live in constant uncertainty. Rick looks at his little family and smiles, saying, "I'm in." Upon hearing this, the people around them applaud and cheer. Many members trust Rick's abilities and they are eager to go to the place Eugene described. Rick leading them there would be the perfect solution. Bob's behavior seems peculiar, although he and Sasha have become a couple. However, tonight he seems particularly reluctant to part with her. He walked out of the church alone. After a while, Rick approaches Gabriel. He has never fully trusted him and he spoke softly to him, saying, "You must be hiding something you can't escape. It's your own business, but these people here are my family. If whatever you're hiding will harm them, I will kill you." Gabriel is silent. Meanwhile, Carol had secretly hidden a car in the woods, perhaps contemplating a quiet departure. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the forest, and it was none other than Daryl. He had also noticed Carol's intention to leave. Before he could inquire about her motives, they heard the sound of a car engine. They immediately went on high alert as a vehicle passed by them. Daryl quickly recognized the markings on the car. It was the same one that took Beth. He hurriedly pulled Carol into a car to pursue. Bob was outside alone. Bob smiled as he reminisced about the kiss he shared with Sasha, but as he continued to dwell on those thoughts, his expression quickly turned sorrowful. Then, filled with disappointment, he walked deeper into the forest and leaned against a tree, where he began to weep. Suddenly, a mysterious person knocked him unconscious from behind. When Bob regained consciousness, he found himself face to face with Gareth. Bob glanced around, finally realizing that he had been captured by these people. Gareth prattled on, saying, "I just want you to understand that what happened to you is not personal. We were simply hungry." It was then that Bob noticed that his leg was missing. These bastards had actually eaten his leg. Gareth continued speaking. Sen put a piece of meat in his mouth and savored it with relish, and remarked that Bob's taste was much better than the others. A man wakes up from his sleep. Shockingly, his left leg has been brutally eaten by someone. This completely shatters his perception. Gareth sits nearby, relishing his meal, and praises the taste of Bob's flesh. He goes on to say what he hated most was the woman with gray hair, because she ruined his end of the Terminus. He had been constantly monitoring them but unfortunately couldn't catch her. In our experience, women's meat tastes a little better, especially pretty women, like your girlfriend Sasha. Upon hearing this, Bob becomes somewhat agitated. Gareth continues, saying, "I will capture all of you and devour you. You are merely our appetizers." Bob, in despair, starts quietly sobbing, and it lasts for a long time. Even the people around him start feeling perplexed, thinking he has gone mad. Bob suddenly bursts into laughter, leaving everyone bewildered. They fear that he might attract all the nearby zombies. Bob pulls down his collar and says,
"I've been bitten, you stupid pricks! I'm tainted meat."
A sense of exhilaration surging through his heart, that he can discuss them before he dies. The others feel a churn in their stomachs and desperately want to vomit out what they have consumed. Seeing them becoming more and more disheveled, Bob becomes increasingly joyful. Subordinates worry that they might turn into zombies, but Gareth reassures them that the meat is thoroughly cooked, so there shouldn't be any problem. Sasha, in the church, also realizes that Bob is missing. Anxiously, she searches for him in the jungle but doesn't find him. Instead, she discovers markings on the trees. Just then, she hears a noise behind her and sees a figure hastily retreating. It's evident that someone is monitoring them. Just as she's about to track them, two zombies lunge at her. However, she effortlessly kills them. Rick and Tyreese, hearing the commotion, rush over. Sasha immediately informs them about the surveillance, stating that it's clear Bob has been captured by them. Even Daryl and Carol have gone missing. The three of them return to the church. Sasha, furious, confronts Gabriel, believing he must be colluding with those people. Otherwise, how coincidental is it to encounter them like this, resulting in the loss of three of their own? Gabriel appears somewhat flustered and insists that he has nothing to do with it. Sasha pulls out her knife and presses him for answers, demanding to know who is monitoring them and where Bob and the others are. Gabriel maintained a look of innocence. At that moment, Rick grabs hold of Sasha, being more experienced in handling such situations. Rick remains calm and composed, which adds to the intensity. he directly asks, "What secrets do you have?" Exactly, facing the beastly Rick, Gabriel's timid and cowardly nature caused him to be intimidated and reveal the truth. He confirmed that he had no connection to the people monitoring them outside. The only thing he had been hiding was a guilty secret. When the apocalypse struck, the members of his church sought refuge in this place. However, Gabriel didn't dare to open the doors, resulting in those people being besieged by zombies. They were calling out his name before they died. Therefore, Gabriel had been burdened with guilt, considering himself guilty. When he finished, his emotions began to crumble. At that moment, Glenn noticed something outside. It appears to be a man lying on the ground. Everyone rushed out immediately and discovered it was Bob, who had lost one of his legs. Sasha looked at him with distress and then took him inside the church. Bob recounted his experiences. He was taken to a school where Gareth and his group savagely ate his left leg while displaying a proud demeanor. Sasha intended to use medication to ease his pain, but Bob didn't want to waste resources. He unbuttoned his collar, revealing that he had been bitten while searching for food. Shortly after, the group gathered together to discuss their next steps. Given Rick's personality, he wouldn't simply let things go, especially with such a deranged group of people. The others agreed as well. Soon, Rick led a group of 6 people out to seek revenge, while the remaining individuals stayed behind in the church to ensure everyone's safety. Just as they left, Gareth and his group emerged from the shadows. This was their plan. They anticipated that Rick and the others would go to the school for retaliation, so they released Bob and made their way to the church. Inside the church, it was empty and eerily quiet. However, Gareth and his group had been monitoring the place all along. They were certain that the remaining people were hiding inside. Carl, who had heard the approaching sound, was already prepared to defend his sister at all costs. Gareth directly ordered his men to occupy the entrances of the rooms, and as he turned the doorknob, they realized that the door was locked from the inside. While he was uncertain about which room they were hiding in, Judith suddenly began to cry, instantly revealing the location of several people. Gareth was very surprised, putting the gun on the floor, Rick's voice coming out of the darkness. Gareth directly threatened Rick. "It was you who put the gun down, or else he would open fire on the room." The words had just fallen. 2 of his fingers fell to the ground simultaneously. Rick emerged, and at that moment,
Put your guns on the floor and kneel.
the 4 individuals became like fish on a chopping board. They dared not resist because Rick wasn't alone. They had underestimated Rick's vigilance. Capturing Bob and then sending him back was already a flaw in their plan. Rick wasn't blinded by hatred. It was a case of the tables turning. Gareth, who had become the captive, realized that based on the enmity between the 2 sides, he wouldn't survive. However, he was puzzled as to why Rick didn't kill them when he first entered. There must be a reason. Rick coldly replied that it was simply a matter of not wanting to waste bullets. When he was bound earlier, he had uttered a phrase about using a red-handled knife to kill Gareth. Now was the time for that phrase to come true. The remaining few people were quickly killed, without showing any mercy towards these cannibalistic monsters. It was just a very bloody scene. Michonne also saw her knife, which she had lost when she escaped from the Terminus. Rick consoled the group because they were the ones who almost died. He meant to say that there was no need to feel guilty for killing those individuals, as they had saved more lives by doing so. Bob was now in his final moments, and one by one, everyone bid their farewells to him. Just as they were about to give him some private time with Sasha, Bob called out to Rick, expressing that he had something to say. He also wanted to see the little baby, Judith, one more time. In his weakened state, Bob said, "I just want to thank you. Before I came to the prison, I thought that good people no longer existed in this world, that everyone had turned into walking dead, but you accepted me and continued to accept others. Thank you, my friend." Finally, Bob also urges Rick to join Abraham and head to Washington to put an end to this terrible world. Rick nodded and replied, "I accept your advice." Finally, Bob and Sasha bid their last goodbyes. They had only just become lovers, and now they were separated by life and death. Tyreese took the knife from his sister's hand. He knew it was a difficult thing for Sasha. The next day, Abraham bid farewell to Rick as he prepared to head to Washington, D.C. He left Rick a map, hoping that Rick would catch up with them and witness the dawn of a new world together. Abraham truly admired Rick's abilities, acknowledging that without him, their group might not have made it this far. However, with Carol and Daryl missing, Rick couldn't leave them behind. Glenn and Maggie also agreed to escort Eugene with Abraham and the others, and so, their group became smaller once again. At night, Michonne couldn't sleep and sat near the door. Suddenly, she heard some noise coming from the woods. She drew her knife and cautiously approached, ready to attack. To her surprise, it was the missing Daryl who came out of the woods. Michonne was happy to see him, but she soon realized that Carol was not with him. Daryl spotted the car that had once taken Beth away. Without hesitation, he and Carol set out to track it down. When Daryl returned again, he was alone, and Carol was nowhere to be found. Back to a week ago, Beth woke up in an unfamiliar room after being taken away, dressed in a hospital gown. If it weren't for the outside view, she would have thought the eschatology was just a dream. Soon, a police officer and a doctor entered the room. The doctor introduced himself as Stephen, and the police officer was Dawn. Beth had many questions at that moment. The doctor informed her that she was at Grady Memorial Hospital and that their people had rescued her when they saw she was being attacked by zombies. She had suffered only minor injuries. Officer Dawn added that they had saved her and she would have to work off her debt here. And so, Beth remained in this hospital, doing menial tasks. Gradually, she discovered the peculiarities of this place. The hospital would treat some survivors, but if they showed no signs of improvement, the rescue efforts would be immediately halted to minimize losses. The leader of the hospital is the female police officer named Dawn. Those who have no hope of recovery are thrown down from the elevator shaft, accompanied by the groans of the zombies. Life here has lost basic freedoms, but the advantage is that there is no shortage of food and clothing. Every day, there is ample food, and when Beth comes to collect her meal, a police officer named Gorman approaches her, trying to strike up a conversation. It was him who brought Beth here in the first place. Beth doesn't want to engage with him because the way he looks at her is unsettling, and she suspects he was the one who knocked her out and took her away. After a while, the people who went outside rescue another survivor who is severely injured. The injuries are very serious. Despite Dr. Stevens' opinion that there is no need to treat them, Dawn places great importance on this survivor and forcing him to save the man. The doctor has no choice but to proceed with the rescue measures. During this process, Dawn is actively assisting as if this injured person were her own family member. She keeps urging Stephen, and his patience wears thin. He tells Dawn directly that the survivor fell from upstairs and is suffering from severe internal bleeding. There are no scanning devices available, and treating him would be a waste of resources. Hearing his words, an unnamed anger surges within Dawn, and Beth becomes the target of her venting. Then she tells Stephen, "You better figure out the situation." She's not angry that the man can't be saved. What angers her is her doctor's constant backtalk and challenging of her authority. Beth is also shocked, watching the scene unfold, unable to believe what kind of place this is. Luckily, the doctor proves to be a good person. Not only does he tend to her wounds, but he also comforts her, saying that Dawn behaves like this only when she's in a bad mood. As they walk into the hallway, they witness a woman trying to escape but being caught and brought back. The woman's arm has been bitten by a zombie. Dawn kindly reassures her and urges her to accept treatment, but the woman doesn't appreciate it at all. Her language becomes increasingly vulgar. In the end, Stephen has no choice but to amputate her arm. Beth doesn't want to witness this gruesome scene and is about to leave when Dawn calls her back to help. As a result, Beth's clothes get dirty. She hands the soiled clothes to a young boy who is responsible for the hospital's cleaning work. Beth also raised questions. She wanted to know what was wrong with the woman. Why did she run away? The boy's name is Noah, and he tells Beth that he has never seen anyone able to leave. Speaking of which, he shows Beth the wound on his leg. He and his father were on the verge of death when they were rescued by the hospital's people and brought here. They said they could only save one person. After spending time here, Noah realized that it was because his father was stronger and harder to control, so they didn't save him. Noah also tells her, "Don't be fooled by Dawn being the boss here." She turns a blind eye to what the other police officers do. The reason that woman wanted to escape is because she was violated by Gorman. "I'm also looking for a chance to leave. They think we're both harmless, but they don't understand me, and they don't understand you." Upon hearing this, Beth suddenly feels a sense of affirmation from Noah. Later, while cleaning the ward, the woman wakes up. She realizes that Beth is also new here and doesn't hold any grudges against her. Instead, she tells Beth, Dawn is a coward. She could have controlled her subordinates, but she pretends not to see their violations against her. Sure enough, on that day, Beth discovers that the candy she had hidden under the bed is missing. It was given to her by the doctor. While she's puzzled, Police Officer Gorman walks in and puts the candy in his mouth, commenting on how delicious it is. He even forces Beth to eat the candy. Faced with the overpowering authority, she is completely powerless to resist and can only be forced by the man to have the candy shoved into her mouth. A sense of humiliation rushes over her. Fortunately, At that moment, Dr. Steven steps in and tells him to get out quickly. Gorman directly declares, "This girl is mine," without any trace of a police officer's demeanor. He even arrogantly states that Dawn doesn't care about such matters. He goes on to reprimand the doctor, acting all high and mighty. However, as the only doctor in this place, Steven is not afraid of him and responds by asking, "What will you do when you're sick? Who will you turn to when your wounds get infected?" Gorman starts to back down, leaving the place with an obscene face. After they leave, Beth speaks up and asks why the doctor doesn't leave this disgusting place. Instead of answering, the doctor takes her downstairs. There, it's all zombies and no weapons. It becomes clear to Beth that escaping is simply impossible. They then proceed to the rooftop, where the doctor explains how this place came to be. Beth learns that Dawn killed her superior to gain power and led them to survive in this place. The reason she doesn't intervene with her subordinates is to motivate them to work for the hospital. After a few minutes of conversation, the doctor said he would stay here for a while and instructs Beth to administer type B medication to the severely injured patient. Beth nods, indicating that she will do it. Subsequently, she enters the patient's ward and injects the medication as instructed by the doctor. It is at this moment that Noah happens to pass by the area. Suddenly, the man on the hospital bed starts convulsing uncontrollably, unable to stop. Beth becomes panicked, not knowing what to do. Within minutes, the man loses his breath. Dawn arrives at the scene and interrogates Beth, asking what she did. Before Beth can speak, Noah steps forward and admits that while he was mopping the floor, he accidentally knocked off the ventilator, leading to this tragedy. Shortly after, Noah is taken away, likely to face punishment. Beth quickly approaches the doctor and reveals the truth. However, the doctor denies ever instructing her to administer the medication, claiming that the patient's convulsions were expected. Beth becomes even more confused, saying, "But you told me to give him the type B medication." Surprisingly, the doctor adamantly denies it, saying, "I never said that." Beth is at a loss for words. At this point, Noah's pained voice could be heard in the next room. She wants to rush over and clarify the situation but is stopped by the doctor. Noah truly is a brave man. He knows that if Beth were to be punished instead, it could lead to other unfavorable consequences, so he volunteered to take on. Beth looks at him with a pang of sorrow. She has already made up her mind to leave this place with Noah. Noah, after thinking for a moment, suggests that they escape through the basement, which is the fastest route but also very dangerous. Any slight noise could attract zombies. He plans to distract Dawn while she searches for the spare elevator key in her office, the two waiting for the right moment to take action. In the afternoon, Beth exits the patient's room and sees Dawn dispatching supplies. Noah is also present, giving her an affirming glance. Beth immediately understands the message and quietly makes her way towards Dawn's office. She sneaks in and starts searching through every drawer, desperately looking for the spare elevator key. However, to her shock, she notices bloodstains on the floor. It was that woman she came here with scissors. It seems the woman didn't want to live. She cuts herself. There, written on the ground, is a scathing message cursing Dawn. Beth laments for the woman's tragic decision but quickly refocuses on her mission. She resumes her search and soon finds the key in the second drawer on the. Just as she lifts her head, Gorman walks in. Beth seizes the opportunity and swiftly exits, ensuring that he doesn't discover the woman's body. Instead of exposing her, Gorman used the situation to blackmail Beth, lewdly manhandling her. Beth glances back and notices the woman's fingers twitching. She nodded and pretended to obey Gorman, who became more excited and misunderstood her obedience. Unbeknownst to he, the woman had already regained consciousness. Just moments ago, Gorman was praising Beth for her obedience when suddenly, the zombie directly bit into his throat. This woman has completed her revenge. Beth quickly made her way out. Locking eyes with Noah, they hurriedly reached the elevator shaft, where they had prepared a rope. From here, they could descend into the basement. Noah secured the rope around Beth's body and slowly lowered her down. Fortunately, she landed safely on the ground without any incident. It was now Noah's turn, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, unexpectedly, a zombie reached out to grab him, causing him to accidentally let go of the rope. He plummeted down but luckily landed on a pile of corpses, saving his life. Beth quickly followed suit and jumped down. They supported each other and made their way out of the corridor. Beth handed the flashlight to Noah and pulled out Gorman's handgun. There were zombies around, so they had to be cautious and avoid drawing attention. Fortunately, Beth had previous experience with Rick and had encountered numerous situations like this before. Shooting and killing zombies had become routine, now rushing all the way out. The moment they opened the door, The glare made them a little uncomfortable. The exit was right in front of them, and they sprinted towards it. However, many zombies had also surrounded them. Beth could have been the first one to run out, but she chose to stay behind and cover Noah. Slowly, she too became surrounded by zombies. However, to her relief, gunshots rang out from behind her. The zombies are also falling to the ground. The police had caught up. Noah had already escaped outside, but he had no choice but to leave Beth behind, and Beth was once again caught and pinned to the ground. As she watched Noah escape, she felt a sense of solace. Beth didn't care about being captured again. She confronted Dawn and unleashed a barrage of curses, only to be met with a slap. This time, she was beaten quite severely. The doctor, as always, tended to Beth's wounds. As the doctor was about to leave, Beth directly asked, "You knew that man was a doctor, so you made me administer the wrong medicine, didn't you? You used me to kill him because if he had survived, there would be one more doctor, and Dawn wouldn't need you anymore." Stephen didn't refute her accusations because Beth's statements were completely accurate. This man was a famous doctor before the end of the world. If the man had survived, with luck Stephen would have been evicted. With misfortune he might even have been killed by a scumbag like Gorman. Beth had finally realized the true nature of this place, nothing but filth and hypocrisy. She picked up the surgical forceps and walked into the corridor. Saving people here was merely a means of serving them. She intended to put an end to Dawn's deceitful ways. For this, she wasn't afraid of death. However, at that moment, the police brought in another person they had rescued from outside. Someone Beth recognized. It was Carol, who had been with Daryl in the pursuit of the car. In the deserted and desolate city, two figures cautiously moved forward, afraid of attracting zombies with any noise. They were Carol and Daryl, who were tracking the car. Since they ran out of gas, they lost track of the group and didn't know their exact whereabouts. They arrived at a large building, planning to take a break. They gazed at the scenery outside, wonder what the city has been through. At that moment, Daryl seemed to have spotted something. He took the binoculars from Carol's hands and started observing. There was a car on the distant bridge with a cross symbol on it. It must be the group's vehicle, and perhaps there were clues inside. Without hesitation, the two swiftly made their way towards the car. Just as Carol threw her gun over and was about to climb through, she was unexpectedly intercepted by a boy who had grabbed the gun. It was Noah, who had managed to escape. He asked Daryl to put down his crossbow and, with no other option, they had to put their weapons on the ground. Noah picked up the crossbow and slung it over his shoulder. Then, he cut open the tent. He didn't want to kill anyone. He just wanted to use the zombies as a barrier to slow them down. Carol used her handgun to kill one of the zombies, and then she aimed it directly at Noah. However, Daryl intervened and prevented her from shooting. The two of them quickly chased after Noah, but the boy had already escaped. Carol was puzzled by why she wasn't allowed to shoot him. Daryl explained that he was just a kid, and they could find more weapons. Soon, they arrived at the car. Nearly 1/3 of the car was hanging outside the bridge. Daryl opened the car door, and they began searching inside. Carol looked outside and noticed that the zombies were gradually gathering around the car. They needed to leave this place quickly. Just as the two were preparing to leave, Daryl saw a message on a stretcher. It suggested that Beth might be in this Grady Memorial Hospital. Carol fired 3 shots in succession, emptying the last 3 bullets in her handgun. They couldn't dwell on it for now because the zombies were closing in. With too many zombies, they had no choice but to retreat back into the car and close the door. The number of zombies kept increasing, making it impossible for them to escape. They realized the situation was dire. With the car at risk of being pushed off the bridge, quickly pulled Carol into her seat and fastened their seatbelts as a precaution. The car started shaking violently, and both of them were breathing heavily. They exchanged a glance, unsure if they would survive the fall. Carol closed her eyes, and in the next second, the airbags deployed just in time. They were fortunate to have survived, although their organs were aching from the impact. Supporting each other, they continued towards the hospital. They arrived at a building across from the hospital, providing a good vantage point to observe the situation inside. If anyone entered or exited the hospital, they would be visible from there. Suddenly, gunshots echoed from inside the building, confirming that someone was there. Carol and Daryl swiftly moved out to investigate. They came across a zombie pinned by Daryl's crossbow arrow, indicating that Noah was in the vicinity. Soon after, they heard a series of consecutive gunshots. Carol hurried over to the source and found Noah pushing a zombie towards her. Luckily, Daryl was right behind her. Afterwards, Daryl quickly caught up and found Noah in a room. preparing to move a bookshelf. Without hesitation, Daryl charged forward like a wild bull. Noah is terrified and pleads for Carol and Daryl's help. However, Daryl believed that Noah had been tracking them and was ready to leave him behind. The boy's act of pushing a zombie towards Carol had angered Daryl, but Carol hesitated at this moment. Could they really just abandon him? Getting eaten by zombies was inevitable for Noah. Daryl was genuinely angry and left without looking back. Meanwhile, the zombies emerged and began pulling at Noah relentlessly. Carol grew anxious, and a crossbow bolt struck the zombie's head. Daryl still had a soft heart and he moved the bookshelf to one side. Noah came out, repeatedly expressing his gratitude. Then, his first instinct was to run to the window and announce that he had to leave. The sound of gunfire would surely attract the people in the area.
Who? Them people at the hospital.
Wait, just tell us. Is there a blonde girl there? You see a blonde girl?
Beth?
The three of them were equally shocked to hear that this kid knew Beth. Noah quickly explained that Beth helped him escape but got captured in the process. At that moment, a car arrived downstairs. The three of them realized they had to leave immediately and headed towards the lobby. Unfortunately, as Carol ran out, she was knocked down by the approaching group. Daryl was about to charge out, but Noah stopped him and reassured him that they were the only hope to save their friends. They had medical supplies and doctors, and killing the others wouldn't solve anything. They could find another chance to save Beth and Carol. It was just that the enemy had more people and weapons, which explained why Beth saw Carol at the hospital. Daryl also calmed down and realized that fighting alone would be futile. He and Noah got into the car, planning to return to the church and gather a rescue party. Rick wouldn't just sit idly by. By the time Daryl and Noah arrived at the church, it was already evening. Daryl returned to the church with Noah. Rick takes immediate action and prepares to go to the rescue. Michonne stayed behind to protect Carl and Judith. To prevent any mishaps, they fortified the church. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, Beth quietly entered the ward where Carol was lying. Still unconscious, she didn't dare to reveal that she knew Carol. In the afternoon, Beth was mopping the floor as usual while one of the officers was briefing Dawn on the situation. The man mentioned that the woman they had rescued earlier was critically injured with no signs of improvement. He suggested removing the medical equipment to avoid unnecessary waste. But Beth couldn't just stand by and watch Carol being given up on. She immediately questioned the man, asking why they were charging their useless radio every day when their resources were limited. The woman they saved had only been here for a day. If they couldn't even save a person in this place, what was the point of their existence? Dawn interrupted Beth's words directly and decided to follow the man's suggestion. She ordered to stop the medical treatment and remove the equipment from Carol. If she managed to survive, it would be her luck. The man was pleased with Dawn's decision and left the room. Once he was gone, Dawn then said to Beth, "I also want to save that woman, but you don't understand how fragile my authority is. I can't directly help her, so if you want to save her, you'll have to take matters into your own hands." Saying that, Dawn took out a key and told Beth, "This key can open the medication storage room. It's extremely valuable in the hospital." She then handed the key to Beth, leaving her somewhat surprised by Dawn's sudden change of heart. Beth proceeded to find Dr. Stephen, with whom she had a decent relationship. She straightforwardly asked him, "What medicine would you use if you were treating that patient?" The doctor immediately guessed that Beth had the key in her hand. He warned her, saying, "If Dawn gave you that key, she definitely has ulterior motives." However, Beth couldn't concern herself with that right now. Saving Carol was more important than anything else. After a moment's thought, the doctor told her, "Inject 5 milliliters of adrenaline. It won't wake her up immediately, but it will stabilize her blood pressure and give her a chance to survive." Beth nodded and left the room. She then proceeded to the hallway outside the ward, where she handed something to an elderly man. It was a scarce commodity, a strawberry. The old man understood the significance of it and immediately pretended to feel unwell, attracting the attention of the on-duty police officers. His performance was so convincing that no one suspected anything. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Beth quickly opened the cabinet. Fortunately, she had often assisted her father in surgeries, so she quickly found the adrenaline. She calmly locked the cabinet again, as if nothing had happened, and casually walked past the old man, who understood that his task was complete. Quietly, Beth opened Carol's hospital room and concealed the infusion equipment in the bedsheets. Looking at the calm Beth, couldn't help but marvel. The Beth who was once on the farm was timid and even attempted suicide after her mother's death. She used to hide in her father's embrace when faced with difficulties. She now has her own opinions and is both brave and clever in what she does. After finishing the infusion work, she softly called out to Carol and held her hand, hoping she would wake up soon. Otherwise, she would be at the mercy of these people. Meanwhile, Rick and the others had arrived near the hospital. They gathered together to discuss how to rescue the people inside. Originally, Rick had planned a direct assault in the evening. Since Noah had spent a year there, he knew the layout well. The plan was to break the lock of the staircase door, proceed to the 5th floor, take out the guards, and then rescue their people. Tyreese, however, didn't want to kill anyone or cause harm to their own people. They could lure the police out in the city, capture them and exchange them for hostages. This way, no one would suffer any losses, and they could all go their separate ways. Daryl also thought it was a good idea, and eventually, Rick agreed as well. Take action on this. Noah fired shots in the city, quickly drawing the attention of the police who began to pursue him. During this time, they had been searching for Noah. 2 police officers, a man and a woman, intercepted him. Noah cooperated fully and put down his weapon. The bald policeman came up and tied his hands straight away and told Noah to speak up if he felt tight. It seems this policeman is one of the few decent people. At this moment, Rick and the others emerged with their guns and told the 2 police officers to cooperate, emphasizing that nobody would be harmed if they complied. Now the situation is stronger than the people and they had to give in. The bald police officer stood up and asked Rick, noting his manner of speaking and his overall demeanor, if he was a police officer. Rick looked at him in astonishment. The bald cop said he used to be one, so they were peers. Noah also came over and added that his name was Bob and that he was a very nice man in the hospital. Bob would have supported us. Just then, a car came rushing towards them, and they immediately opened fire. However, they missed the driver and instead helped 2 people escape. Fortunately, Sasha managed to shoot and burst the car's tires. Rick quickly led the group in pursuit. The car stopped. The 2 tied up flee quickly towards the inside. The group chased after them. Daryl stayed behind to inspect the car since the driver was nowhere to be found. As he checked the vehicle, the driver suddenly jumped out, and a fierce fight ensued between them. Given the graphic violence on the ground, it won't be described here. Finally, Rick arrived in time to save Daryl. Now they had 3 hostages, increasing the chances of an exchange. The hostages understood Rick and his group's intentions and expressed that they held no deep grudges. They even offered to help actively, believing that a peaceful resolution would benefit both sides. Subsequently, Rick had a private conversation with the police officer, Bob, and learned valuable information about Dawn. Rick expressed his gratitude and decided to make the deal 10 minutes later. Sasha kindly offered Bob a bottle of water, but he declined, mentioning that he saw a familiar zombie in the parking lot. He requested Sasha's assistance in giving his acquaintance a final farewell. Sasha didn't hesitate and accompanied the officer to the 2nd floor. Bob pointed out a location for her, and she began scanning for the target. However, at that moment,
Are you sure that's him?
Bob swiftly ran away. Although he wants to help Rick and the others, he is not willing to let his life be controlled by others. However, at that moment, Rick drove up in his car, shouting for Bob to stop. Seeing Bob unaffected, Rick made a ruthless decision. He accelerated and crashed into Bob, rendering him immobile. Bob cried out for Rick to save him. Rick remarked that it didn't have to come to this and that Bob only needed to stop. Bob requested to be sent back to hospital for treatment, but Rick didn't want the trouble. He was willing to do whatever it took to protect his team. Rick returned to the parking lot alone, deciding not to disclose Bob's death to the other 2 individuals. He thought they might resist fiercely during the hostage exchange if they knew. Rick was about to find an excuse to say that Bob had unfortunately met his demise. However, the woman spoke up first, claiming that Bob had been attacked by zombies. We saw the process with our own eyes. The woman was smart. She had guessed that Bob was dead. Rick was pleased with her performance. He turned to the other man and hinted that if he didn't cooperate, he might meet a similar fate. The man hesitated for a moment. He did not want to sacrifice himself and agreed that Bob was devoured by the zombies. One day ago, Abraham's team, leaving the church, headed smoothly towards Washington. They were in high spirits, believing that they would save the world once they reached Washington. Maggie speculated that Daryl and Carol might have already returned. However, Eugene had a worried expression on his face. Don't know what's on his mind. Whenever someone asked him about solving the disaster, he would spout a bunch of incomprehensible technical jargon or claim it was classified military information. At that moment, there was a loud explosion from the vehicle, causing it to veer uncontrollably on the road and eventually crash into another car. Flipping over, the music inside continued to play, attracting nearby zombies. Abraham quickly regained consciousness and his first concern was for Eugene. Fortunately, Everyone else was unharmed, helping each other to stand up, and immediately called out for Eugene. They couldn't afford to lose him. The fate of saving the world relied on him. Seeing everyone safe and sound, Glenn took command without hesitation, leading the way alongside Abraham. The rest of the group followed closely. They wasted no time. Abraham kicked open the car door, and the two of them rushed out to clear the way. Maggie and Rosita followed suit. Eugene comes out with a dumbfounded look on his face. He had no idea how to kill zombies and could only watch in a daze as the others protected him. That was just his nature. Despite being extremely intelligent, he was incredibly timid, with combat skills that were practically non-existent. 3 minutes later, all the zombies were eliminated. Abraham spoke up. "We can't stop now. We must keep moving. Saving the world is our mission." Unexpectedly, Eugene interjected, saying, "We've had a serious car accident, and there are many obstacles on the road. We can go back to the church and reconsider our plans." As soon as Eugene voiced his suggestion, he faced opposition from Abraham. In Abraham's dictionary, there was no such thing as turning back. It was just like a war, where all difficulties had to be overcome, and retreat was not an option. And so, the group set off again, hoping to find a usable vehicle nearby. They took shelter in a library for the night, everyone fantasizing about Eugene saving the world and returning to a normal society. The next day, they found a functional fire truck nearby, and Abraham couldn't stop smiling. They drove for a while but had to stop and rest when the engine overheated. At that moment, a foul smell wafted over, and they all sensed something ahead. The group decided to investigate together and were astounded when they arrived at the scene. The sight was horrifying beyond belief. With a dense horde of zombies blocking their path, it was impossible to pass through. Glenn immediately led the others back, as trying to cross that area would be tantamount to suicide. Abraham was the only one mumbling in place, repeating the words, "I will not surrender." No matter how others tried to persuade him, he wouldn't listen. He insisted on not turning back and didn't even consider taking a detour. His sole focus was to reach Washington as quickly as possible. In the face of the others' well-intentioned words, he erupted in anger and shouted,
"I knew it! And that means we are not going south, going around, or going back!"
Then, he marched directly toward Eugene, grabbing him and intending to take him back to the fire truck. His plan was to step on the gas and charge through. Seeing his rough demeanor, the others rushed to intervene and tried to dissuade him. However, Abraham had already reached a state of frenzy and forcefully pushed them away. Chaos ensued. Unable to bear it any longer, Eugene spoke loudly, confessing, "I'm not a scientist." He repeated it 3 times, and everyone fell silent. Looking at him, Eugene shuddered and continued, "I lied. I'm not a scientist, and I don't know how to stop this." The others wore expressions of disbelief. Eugene went on, "I know I'm smarter than most people, and I had a hunch that the chances of survival in Washington were slightly higher, but I have no combat skills. That's why I thought of deceiving some people to take me there." Abraham's conviction crumbled in an instant. Rosita, with a quivering voice, said, "So many people have died to help you get this far." In fact, Eugene remembered the name of every person who had sacrificed their lives. He continued, "The closer we get to Washington, the more anxious I become. That's why I've been trying to find ways to stop us from moving forward. I tampered with the previous vehicle, and just now I realized I couldn't keep it hidden any longer. I can't let everyone die in vain." Abraham couldn't bear it any longer. He approached Eugene and delivered a powerful punch, using every ounce of his strength. He wanted to kill the bastard. Rosita stood in front of Abraham, stopping him, with her hand already on her gun. Abraham looked at his hand, then turned around and walked away. Meanwhile, Eugene was beaten senseless and lay unconscious, passed out and unresponsive. Abraham knelt down at the front of the vehicle. He was truly broken, reflecting on the first time he saw Eugene, during the eschatology when his wife and son had already died. Abraham felt that living in this world had no meaning. He had taken out his gun, prepared to end his own life, when he noticed 3 zombies chasing a man in the distance. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and killed them. Eugene hurriedly thanked him, but Abraham paid him no attention. He only wanted to continue leaving this world. Seeing Abraham's formidable combat skills, Eugene directly called out to him.
"I have a very important mission."
It was that statement that reignited Abraham's fighting spirit. From that point on, he was determined to escort Eugene to Washington. It was his mission to solve the damn virus, but now even that was a lie from this bastard. Rosita tried to offer him water, but he slapped it away. He was now a powder keg. Even glaring angrily at Rosita, Seeing him so volatile, Maggie pointed her gun at him. To their surprise, he showed no fear and even hoped that Maggie would shoot him. Then he turned around and knelt on the ground. One was in despair, while the other was unconscious. The group decided to go nearby and find some food. Maggie volunteered to stay behind and take care of the two of them, while Glenn took the two women with him to search. After they left, Maggie couldn't bear to see Eugene lying exposed to the scorching sun. She took a ladder from the vehicle and propped it against the front of the fire truck. Then she placed a blanket on it. Even though Eugene lied to them, can't kill him. As the evening approached, Glenn and the other two still hadn't returned. Maggie handed Abraham a bottle of water. He had been kneeling for the entire afternoon. Abraham finally spoke and said, "Initially, I thought I wanted you to shoot me, but the truth is, I don't want to die now." After kneeling for so long, he had gained some clarity. Setting aside Eugene's deception, Rosita was his wife, and he still had the will to survive. At that moment, they heard a commotion in the distance, and both of them became alert. It turned out that Eugene had regained consciousness. Maggie hurriedly reassured him and told him not to move. Abraham also felt somewhat guilty for beating Eugene like that. Then he picked up the water from the ground. Life had to go on. Meanwhile, Glenn and the others had caught some fish and returned to the road. Previous episode says, Rick and the others ventured out to rescue Beth and Carol. Michonne, the three of them stayed behind at the church. Carl placed weapons in front of Gabriel and told him to choose one, teaching him that everyone has to learn to protect themselves. Gabriel had been completely defenseless since eschatology, and it was a miracle that he had managed to survive on his own until now. He reluctantly picked up one of the long knives as Carl enthusiastically instructed him on how to stab a zombie in the head. Gabriel still felt unable to accept it and apologized to Carl before retreating to his room. Everyone believed Gabriel to be a useless coward, but his actions in the future would overturn people's perception of him. When he returned to his room, instead of resting, Gabriel pried open the floor using the knife until it was large enough for him to fit through. With the front door and windows sealed shut, he resorted to this method just to slip out. However, Gabriel had some bad luck as he stepped on a nail just 2 steps away. Later, he arrived at the school where Gareth and the others had captured Bob. He searched the ground continuously, unaware of what he was looking for. Finally, he found a backpack containing a Bible. That's when he saw Bob's severed leg, and he couldn't believe it. Gabriel must have been initially threatened by Gareth and the others to approach Rick and lead them to the church. However, he never anticipated the depravity of these people, who had actually cannibalized Bob's leg while he was still alive. That's why he became so distraught. At this time, the zombies inside the school broke through the glass, and countless zombies poured out. Gabriel had no choice but to escape. He had no fighting ability whatsoever. Due to his injured foot, he couldn't shake off the zombies and instead led them to the church. He initially planned to return to his room by the same route, but the zombies had already surrounded him, forcing him to continue running. He shouted loudly, pleading to let him in. He is now like the churchman. He turned away from the door. Carl and Michonne finally heard the cries for help. They were puzzled about how Gabriel got outside, but now was not the time to investigate. Michonne quickly strapped Judith onto her back, grabbed her weapons, and prepared to go for support. However, the nailed door was difficult to pry open. They could only hear Gabriel's desperate cries from outside. In the end, Michonne had no choice but to use an axe to break it open. They couldn't let Gabriel wait outside to die. Gabriel watched the approaching zombies, and he was losing his mind. He had never imagined such a day would come. Carl had taught him to use weapons for self-defense, but he believed it would stain his soul. But now, both humans and zombies were dangerous. Fortunately, the door finally opened, and Gabriel quickly ran inside. However, the church had also been overrun. Michonne stood as the last line of defense, killing the approaching zombies, but their numbers were too great. Gabriel urgently shouted for them to go to his room. After the three entered, they quickly closed the door, but the zombie's hand got stuck in the door crack, making it difficult to close. Gabriel hurriedly instructed Carl and Michonne to escape from under the floor. Without any hesitation, the two of them swiftly took action. This time, Gabriel was not cowardly. He took charge of covering their retreat. Fortunately, he managed to climb out without any trouble. Soon, Carl and Michonne reached the entrance of the church again. They intended to trap the zombies inside. They found some wooden boards and securely fastened the door shut. The zombies were successfully locked inside, but they had lost another shelter. Michonne then asked Gabriel where he had been earlier. He explained that he had gone to the school to see if the world was really as dangerous as it seemed. While they were talking, the wooden boards on the door started falling off. It seemed that they wouldn't be able to hold back the zombies for much longer. Just then, the sound of a car engine reached their ears. That turned out to be Abraham and his group. He parked the car right in front of the church entrance. Washington was a hoax, so they had come back. Although Eugene had deceived them, they hadn't abandoned him. After getting out of the car, Maggie embraced her old friends, and being together with the team felt truly wonderful. Glenn also explained their situation to Michonne, and upon hearing about Eugene's actions, Michonne was also speechless for a while. Maggie couldn't believe her ears when she heard that her younger sister was still alive. Voice with a tremor, her sister was alive. There was no better news than that. The others also smiled. Tara suggested, "Let's set off right away. We'll go together to rescue your sister." Meanwhile, Rick had already contacted the hospital staff through the walkie-talkie. After a few minutes, 2 police officers sent by the hospital arrived at the negotiation site. Rick introduced himself and, as a gesture of goodwill, placed his handgun on the ground to prevent any unexpected incidents. The others had already positioned themselves on the rooftop. Rick spoke straightforwardly, "We have 2 of your people with us. We only want to exchange Carol and Beth." The 2 police officers pondered for a moment and then asked where their people were. Before they could finish their inquiry, a zombie behind them collapsed. Startled, they looked around nervously. After further communication, Dawn agreed to the hostage exchange. They brought Rick and his group to the 5th floor of the hospital. Beth had changed into the clothes she wore before coming here, and Carol had regained consciousness. Dawn and her people stood ready, prepared for any situation. Rick saw Carol and Beth through the glass. To ensure a smooth transaction, Dawn signaled her subordinates to put away their guns. Rick naturally understood the protocol and instructed everyone to secure their weapons. Subsequently, both parties walked in and commenced the exchange. Rick spoke directly, stating, "We haven't harmed them, we just want to complete the trade safely." Dawn quickly noticed that Bob was not present. Rick hadn't spoken yet, but the 2 police officers spoke up first. They revealed that Officer Bob had been attacked by a zombie, and they had witnessed it themselves. Dawn knows what's going on but doesn't poke at it. Although Bob was a good person, he was also the one with the highest chances of replacing Dawn at the hospital. The hostage exchange was completed without any conflict erupting. Just as Rick and his group were preparing to leave, Dawn spoke up again, saying that Noah had to stay behind. Rick stopped. These people probably thought he was a very good-tempered man. Even the others from the hospital thought Dawn shouldn't stir up trouble anymore and let them go. However, Dawn's intention was clearly to save face and regain some control. Noah didn't want to cause trouble for Rick and his group, so he stepped forward willingly, indicating his willingness to stay behind. He returned the gun to Rick. Beth caught up at this moment and tightly hugged Noah.
"I knew you'd be back."
Upon hearing these words, Beth became displeased. She also understood why she was given the keys before. Noah left, and Dawn was now short of a servant. That's why she had helped Beth. This woman was using the pretext of helping others, but it was merely to serve her own interests and even to expand her power. The unexpected turn of events caught everyone off guard. Dawn acted purely out of self-defense. She never intended to kill Beth. Blood splattered onto Rick's body, leaving everyone in a state of shock, including the people from the hospital who couldn't believe what had just happened. Dawn wanted to explain, but Rick's anger erupted like a raging fire. Daryl shot and ended Dawn's life. Tensions escalated once again between the 2 sides. Daryl and the others had tears in their eyes, but they were not ignorant individuals.
Hold your fire! It was just about her.
It was clear that Dawn, driven by her vanity, had caused harm not only to others but also to herself. A heavy atmosphere weighed upon Rick's team. They never anticipated losing Beth at such a critical moment. A female police officer spoke up, suggesting they could stay at the hospital, as it was better than being outside. With this incident taking place, Abraham and the others arrived at the hospital. The yard was littered with zombie corpses, indicating that Rick and his group were inside. At that moment, someone walked out from the entrance, and Maggie's face lit up with a smile. It was assumed that they had successfully rescued Beth. Rick led them out, but sadness was evident on everyone's faces. As they beheld the scene behind them, their smiles froze, especially for Maggie, who had imagined countless reunions with her sister along the way. They never expected this outcome. It was unbearable for Maggie to accept that the gentle and kind-hearted Beth had departed from them in this manner. In the world of eschatology, survivors without a home have to wander around. Rick and his group set out to find their next refuge. Their current objective was to reach a mansion located 10 miles away. It was the place where Noah had once lived, and he claimed that it had high walls capable of keeping the zombies at bay. Inside, they could live self-sufficiently. However, As they approached the mansion, something felt off. In theory, there should have been people on guard duty, but the main gate was tightly shut and devoid of any signs of life. Glenn glanced inside and let out a sigh, shaking his head. It seemed that the place had already fallen. Noah grew anxious because his family was still inside. They proceeded to climb over the walls and surveyed their surroundings. The houses were in ruins, and decaying corpses littered the ground. This estate must have fallen for a long time. Can't imagine what has happened to it. Noah collapsed, holding his head and crying in despair. His family was most likely in grave danger. Rick and the others were also deeply disappointed. While others were still waiting for good news from them, he could only reluctantly use the walkie-talkie to contact Carol, to inform them of the situation here. After all, they had come this far. They decided to search around here, to find something useful to bring back. They couldn't return empty-handed. Meanwhile, Tyreese stayed by the side of a grieving Noah, trying to comfort and encourage the young boy. Noah seemed to remember something, and ran off towards a distance. A few minutes later, he stopped at a house. It was his own home. No matter what had happened, he wanted to go back and see. Once inside, a lifeless body lay on the floor. It was his mother. He didn't shed tears, but gently covered her with a towel. Too late after all. Tyreese sensed that there was something in the room. He went in to investigate. There lay a body on the bed, long dead. Then he noticed the photos on the wall. Appeared to be Noah's brothers. Just as he was deeply engrossed in observing, the body on the bed stood up. By the time Tyreese reacted, the zombie had bitten his arm. Noah rushed over upon hearing the commotion. He bid his brother a final farewell. Only then did he see Tyrese's condition. He urged him to hold on while he went to get help. Meanwhile, Rick and the others were searching for supplies. They seemed to have discovered the reason behind the estate's destruction. The perimeter walls had clearly been rammed by vehicles. There were countless limbs and severed arms on the ground, but notably, no upper bodies. It was incredibly eerie. After careful examination, they realized the breached walls were a result of an attack by deranged individuals. At this time, the three heard Noah's shout in the distance. They immediately took out their weapons and rushed towards the sound. When they arrived, several zombies were attacking Noah. Rick quickly went to his aid. Noah hastily informed them about Tyrese's situation. The four of them were filled with urgency as they ran towards Noah's house. Tyreese was drenched in sweat by now. He was experiencing hallucinations, seeing Lizzie and her sister, seeing Beth playing the piano, even the sight of Bob, who had only one leg, all comforting him, telling him everything would be fine, not to worry. Even the governor appeared in the room. Then, in a dazed state, he saw Lizzie reaching out for his hand, when in reality it was Rick pulling him. They quickly took Tyreese and hurriedly retreated, hoping that amputating his arm would save his life. After all, Herschel managed to survive that way. They gathered outside the back door, where more than a dozen zombies had congregated. But now, there was no choice. Rick entrusted Tyreese to Noah's care. He had to join the others in clearing out the zombies. 3 minutes later, the zombies were completely eliminated. They assisted Tyreese and hurried to their vehicle. Although Tyreese was awake, his vision was filled with illusions. He saw only the faces of the deceased. His mind was like a flipping notebook, flashing everything that had happened since the eschatology. Finally, they reached the location of the vehicle. Time was of the essence now. Rick quickly informed Carol to prepare for cauterization and bandaging. They needed to staunch the bleeding as soon as they got back. The car was already at maximum speed, but Tyrese's eyes remained open. He continued to see his departed teammates. It is said that before one dies, one sees those who have died and sees them coming to greet one. Sure enough, after traveling a distance, the car came to a stop. Rick and the others opened the doors and carried Tyreese out. He still couldn't hold out and eventually bled to death. That's it. Within a short span of time, they lost another teammate. In the eschatology, survival meant being constantly on the move. Life was unpredictable. Tomorrow and accidents were simply beyond human control. A group of exhausted survivors trudged along the road. They had been starving for 2 full days, desperate to escape the relentless pursuit of zombies. Several of them stood wearily on either side of a bridge, conserving their energy. It was the only way for them to shake off the zombies behind them. The end times have kept them alive for so long that their cooperation has become instinctive and they no longer need words. These zombies just fell off one by one. However, Sasha didn't follow the plan, disrupting the team's rhythm. Rick had no choice but to tell everyone to grab their weapons and deal with the situation quickly. Sasha acted differently because she had just lost her younger brother. Now, whenever she saw a zombie, anger consumed her. Her recklessness nearly resulted in Rick getting bitten, but luckily, Daryl came to the rescue, inadvertently injuring Abraham in the process. A few minutes later, all the zombies had been taken care of. The group didn't blame Sasha, as they understood her emotions. After clearing the zombies, the group resumed their journey along the road. However, their biggest challenge now was the lack of food and water. They had been hungry for a whole day. Soon, they came across several cars up ahead. They checked them but found no supplies. The cars couldn't even be started. Exhausted, they had no choice but to rest by the roadside. They didn't know how much longer they could hold on. Daryl had gone into the woods to see if he could hunt for food. Daryl even eats earthworms raw, but he returned empty-handed. The days of going hungry made them even more desperate to find a place to settle. Just as they were famished and feeling hopeless, they heard a noise coming from the woods. Immediately, everyone became alert. To their surprise, it was a few dogs barking wildly at them. Rick and Daryl were about to strike when the sound of a gun with a silencer rings out. Sasha is still in a bad mood and is taking it out on the dogs. Rick didn't say anything but instead found a long stick in the forest. It seemed like a stroke of luck. They finally had dinner for the night. In the past, they wouldn't have considered eating dogs, but now they didn't care about such things. They would eat whatever they could to fill their bellies. Even the godfather Gabriel, the hypocrite, took off the symbol and threw it into the fire. Nothing was more important than staying alive. After getting their fill, the group continued their journey. Glenn handed Maggie the last bit of water, but she was not in high spirits as she had also lost her sister. Glenn comforted her and then passed the water to Daryl, but it was rejected. Daryl wanted to save the remaining water for others. Soon after, Daryl ventured into the nearby woods again, hoping to find a river. Once in the forest, he came across a barn but chose not to investigate and instead sat down, consumed by sorrow as he smoked. Beth's death had deeply saddened him, and he blamed himself for not protecting her. The tough guy had come out alone, shielding his vulnerability from others. The last time he had shed tears was when his brother turned into a zombie. After a while, the rest of the group found the much-needed mineral water on the road. When they saw Daryl return, Rick handed him a note. It was strange, and they were certain someone was monitoring them. Rick warned everyone not to drink the water, suspecting it might be a trap. However, Eugene could not hold back any longer and reached for the water and was about to drink it, but was knocked down by Abraham. Eugene could only lick his lips helplessly. At that moment, a loud rumbling sound came from the sky. Everyone looked up, and then the rain poured down, accompanied by increasingly loud thunder. It seemed that even the heavens didn't want them to give up. A simple rain shower brought them hope, and smiles appeared on everyone's faces, except for Maggie and Sasha, who still carried their pain. Rick reminded everyone to quickly find containers to collect the rainwater since they didn't know when the next rainfall would come. However, as Rick gazed into the distance, he sensed something was wrong. The dark clouds were thickening, and the thunder grew louder. Tonight was destined to be a night of raging storm. They had to move quickly and seek a shelter. Soon, they arrived at the barn that Daryl had found. It was spacious enough to accommodate everyone. At night, although the branches were damp, they managed to build a fire. Everyone needed a good rest. However, Daryl went to the door and noticed the strong winds outside. Watching the door shaking violently, he intended to secure it somehow, but to his surprise, countless zombies were approaching from outside. He quickly braced himself against the door, knowing that if they broke through, their chances of survival would be slim. However, his strength alone was limited. Maggie also noticed something amiss and rushed over to support him. Slowly, Sasha also arrived, and those inside who were chatting were drawn to the commotion. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, they all rushed over to reinforce the door. Each person exerted every ounce of their strength. If they couldn't hold it, they would face a horde of zombies and the raging storm. The next day, Maggie woke up to find Judith in Rick's arms. The sight of this cute little child immediately made her feel much better. The night before, everyone was exhausted and deeply asleep, except for Daryl, who sat at the door in sorrow. He and Maggie, along with Sasha, carried a lingering melancholy as they had lost people they cared about. Just hope they can get over the pain soon. Maggie decided to go for a walk with Sasha, intending to support and comfort each other. When they stepped outside, they saw the scattered remains of the zombie horde that had been smashed by fallen trees during the storm. Can imagine how windy it was last night. The scenery after the storm was so beautiful. The serenity of the surroundings brought a sense of calm and tranquility. Maggie, accompanied by Sasha, arrived at a particular spot. Both of them had lost loved ones and were immersed in grief. Now, as they admired the scenery and chatted with each other, their moods improved. Suddenly, a man silently approached them, greeting them gently. Instantly, both women became wary. This man was incredibly handsome and polite. He smiled and introduced himself as Aaron. He acknowledged the danger of strangers but claimed to be their friend. He expressed his desire to speak with their leader, Rick. Maggie and Sasha grew even more perplexed. How did this person know Rick's name? They'd been out on the streets for a week. Rick has his head down thinking about how to keep everyone alive. At that moment, Maggie pushed the door open and returned. Seeing a stranger, everyone immediately went on guard. Daryl was the first to step forward and ran outside to check for any ambush. He then proceeded to frisk the man, ensuring he had no weapons on him. Maggie explained to the group that they had encountered him outside. The man willingly surrendered his weapons as well. Aaron was feeling somewhat uneasy at this point. He hadn't expected the group to appear so unfriendly. After hesitating for a couple of seconds, he managed to force a smile and greeted them. Aaron couldn't help but admire Rick's leadership aura. Despite their current downtrodden state, Rick's presence was intimidating to Aaron. Rick took the man's handgun and asked, "How can we assist you?" Aaron was visibly uncomfortable. Rick's oppressive aura is too strong, but he still managed to say, "There's a community nearby where we can all survive together. I've come to invite you to join us. You're all valuable individuals, but it is up to our administrators to decide whether they can join. I'm only responsible for scouting and recruiting good people from the outside." After finishing his statement, Aaron noticed that Rick remained unmoved. He continued, "It's understandable if you don't trust me. You can see the contents of my backpack." Sasha understood his implication and handed the backpack to Rick. Aaron continued to add, "Just talking about how great our community is won't convince you to follow me. I firmly believe that seeing what's inside will give you a better understanding." Before he could continue rambling, Daryl interrupted him, telling him to shut up. Rick took out a photo from the envelope. The first picture showed the walls of their community. Aaron had been friendly throughout, and now he began explaining the materials used for the walls and various community benefits and security measures. Usually, survivors would be ecstatic and eager to join after hearing all this. Rick didn't look at the photos below. The descriptions were just too idealistic to believe. He delivered a direct punch that knocked Aaron unconscious. Some of the group members felt that Aaron didn't seem like a bad person, but they didn't voice any objections to Rick. Only Michonne said to Rick, "Maybe we should try to get to know a bit. He doesn't seem like a bad person." Rick didn't respond but addressed everyone, saying,
We gotta secure him. Dump his pack. Let's see who this guy really is.
Rick. Everybody else, we need eyes in every direction. They're coming for us. We might not know how or when, but they are.
Glenn didn't see anyone at the gate. He'll continue to keep watch. Carl also found something in Aaron's backpack. It turned out to be a flare gun, most likely used to signal his companions. After a while, Aaron regained consciousness, but he didn't show any anger. He maintained a smile on his face. Instead, he praised them for being cautious. Before he could finish his sentence, Rick asked directly, "How many people have you brought with you?" As he spoke, he pulled out Aaron's flare gun. This time, Aaron lost his smile. Instead, he questioned, "Does it really matter? Would you believe me even if I told you how many people there are?" Rick became even more convinced that something was amiss. Being punched and still able to smile, it didn't make sense. Aaron continued, "Would you believe the person who provided you with water on the road?" Several people turned their attention to the water bottles in his backpack. It was indeed the same brand. Daryl immediately asked, "How long have you been following us?" Aaron didn't shy away from admitting, "It's been so long that I can't even remember. I've witnessed your unity, as well as the group of walkers trailing behind you. Despite having no food or water, you never attacked each other. I wanted to make sure what kind of people I'd be bringing into the community. You are truly humane individuals. Humans are the most valuable resource in this world." The people present fell into contemplation upon hearing his words. The logic he presented was sound, and it didn't sound like lies. Everyone was exhausted, and they truly needed a place like this. Rick approached, carrying the weight of the entire group's lives on his shoulders. Rick then shook his head. He was not going to believe in pie in the sky at all. Aaron promised, "I'll drive you all to the community so you can see for yourselves. We can leave now and arrive by noon. My car is parked a few miles away because the storm made the road impassable." But Rick still doesn't believe him. Michonne, on the other hand, felt that Rick was being overly skeptical. She decided to go and check if there really was car, because it represented hope. Nobody knew how much longer they could hold on like this. Rick knew that the others probably had the same thought, so he didn't object. Instead, he sent Abraham along with the others. The remaining people hid nearby, observing the surroundings. Soon, only Rick and Aaron were left inside the house. Aaron wasn't afraid. Instead, he said. I know you're not bad people. You won't kill me. The community won't give you any trouble either. Rick remained cold and said, just because we're good people doesn't mean we won't kill you. If they don't return within an hour, I'll put a knife through your head. Soon, Michonne and the others arrived at the designated road. Unbeknownst to them, someone was secretly watching their every move. After a while, they indeed spotted 2 cars, and the road was indeed blocked. It seemed that Aaron had told the truth. They proceeded to open the doors of the vehicles and quickly searched them. The interiors were secure, and Abraham couldn't believe his eyes when he found some food that he hadn't eaten in a long time. This made them even more eager to visit the community. Since they had found the cars, they naturally drove them back to the barn. The food they discovered was brought along as well. Rick held up one of the cans and said, regardless of whether we go to your community or not, this food belongs to us. It was evident that Rick still didn't want to trust Aaron. However, Michonne suggested that perhaps he was lying or trying to harm them. But up until now, we've seen that he's sincere and hasn't harmed us. Isn't this exactly what we need right now? So, we should all go. Immediately began seeking everyone's opinions. Michonne believed that Rick was being overly sensitive at the moment. Although many people remained silent, their inclination was to go and see the community. Rick didn't get angry. They were all one family. Since the decision had been made, they would shoulder it together, but everyone's guard is still up, insisting that Aaron name the route of the community. They won't let a stranger drive. Aaron had no choice but to compromise. He said, we'll take Highway 16, and once we're closer, I'll guide you from there. Rick looked at the map and immediately said, we'll take Route 23. The more Aaron insisted on Highway 16, the more Rick insisted on Route 23. He also suggested that they depart at sunset so that they could handle any unforeseen circumstances under the cover of darkness. Have to say that Rick has thought of all the worst possible outcomes. Later, Michonne found Rick near the cars. She wanted to persuade him to be less sensitive, but Rick said, when you first went to the town, it seemed wonderful there, and even when we went to Terminus, it seemed perfect. Tonight, we'll reach their walls, without being able to see inside. I have to make the decision of whether or not to bring you all in. That man asked me what it would take for me to trust him. The truth is, there's nothing that could convince me to walk into their community, but it's a decision we've all made. So let's go and see. Evening, they set off in the 2 cars. They followed Route 23. Rick they took Aaron and led the way. Michonne then flipped through the photos. The buildings in the pictures indeed looked cozy, but she quickly noticed that there was something off. In all the photos there is no one. At that moment, Rick also discovered something in the front seat, a listening device. Glenn couldn't help but ask, have you been listening to us? Rick was no longer calm. Perhaps their plan had been spotted by Aaron's teammates. As they anxiously discussed the situation, Glenn didn't notice the zombies in front of him. The car glass was covered in blood. They couldn't stop now. It would lead to being surrounded by zombies. Also worried about cars behind you tailgating and overturning. After passing through the zombie hordes, and finally, the car came to a halt. Glenn was panting heavily, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Rick stepped out of the car and surveyed the scene. There were only zombies behind them. No signs of other vehicles were seen. It seems they didn't rush in and should be in no danger. They decided to turn the car around and go back to find the others. Glenn wanted to clean the blood off the windshield to improve visibility, but the car won't start. The zombies were closing in, and everyone was getting nervous. Unable to start the car, they had no choice but to make a quick escape on foot. Just as they were about to flee, they noticed a signal flare shooting up into the sky in the distance. Aaron's expression suddenly became particularly tense when he saw it. With the words on his lips, I have to go. This thing is over. His demeanor changed drastically from his usual mild-mannered self. Without hesitation, he kicked open the car door and sprinted towards the direction of the signal flare, disregarding everything else around him. After thinking for a moment, Rick realized it made sense and took out his weapon to chase after them. When they reached the woods, Aaron's whereabouts were no longer visible, but they were surrounded by countless zombies. Glenn had to fight off the zombies while walking, gradually getting separated from Rick and the others. However, Glenn came across Aaron being attacked by zombies. After a moment of hesitation, he decided to save him since Aaron hadn't caused them any harm. Glenn also untied the rope that bound Aaron. Soon, gunshots were heard from Rick and the others. Glenn told Aaron to leave on his own. He needed to go and provide support, but Aaron stopped him again, assuring him that the community wouldn't disappoint them. Meanwhile, Rick was still searching for the missing Glenn, but there were too many zombies around. He had run out of bullets for his handgun and instinctively pulled out a signal flare gun. Direct fire. Both of them had no choice but to engage in close combat with the zombies. Fortunately, at that moment, gunfire sounded, and Glenn and Aaron arrived to support them. Rick glanced at them, softening his attitude towards Aaron and deciding not to tie him up anymore. They all headed towards the direction of the signal flare. Soon, they arrived at Highway 16, finding it empty without any trace of the others. The flare seems to have come from the water tower. Daryl and the others were indeed here. They saw the flare and thought it was from Rick, so they rushed to the area. Daryl was whistling. It's a code word in the team. Rick and the others quickly found them. Maggie and Carl hurriedly came out, relieved to see that both sides were unharmed. However, Aaron kept calling out a name, Eric. Aaron rushed inside where a man was sitting on a chair with a dislocated ankle. They were not only teammates but also lovers. Eric mentioned his injured ankle, and he expressed gratitude to the group for saving them. After a while, Aaron came out. Maggie and the others saved his loved one and he is very grateful. Proposed resting here for the night before heading to the community the next day. He promised to repay this kindness. Aaron appeared genuinely sincere, and almost everyone had started to trust him. They no longer insisted on continuing the journey at night. Though Rick remained cautious, he agreed with the majority. The next morning, the vehicle set off once again. Each person was engaged in their own thoughts, pondering whether the community was truly a safe place. After 4 hours, they finally arrived at the so-called community. It had sturdy walls. Everyone stepped out of the vehicles, armed with their weapons. There were no armed individuals waiting for them here. Aaron's words turned out to be true. Carol said to Rick that this time he was wrong, but his actions were right. It was the group's affirmation of him. In the previous episode, Rick and the group arrived at a new community. The post-apocalyptic experience makes them not easily put down their weapons. Rick saw this as a two-way choice. He would only surrender their weapons if they decided to stay. Each person had to undergo an interview with the community's leader, Deanna. Rick was the first to be interviewed, and he conversed with Deanna about the situation. It turned out that her husband had built the walls of the community when the disaster struck. Rick suddenly realized that these people had been hiding here since the eschatology, completely unaware of the harsh realities outside. It explained why there were no guards on the walls. Deanna expressed her belief that the community needed people who had experienced the outside world. Rick's group seemed to be the most suitable team they had observed. Rick didn't hesitate to tell her directly that they should secure the community by closing the doors and arming themselves. He emphasized that in the outside world, people would do anything to survive, and he himself had killed countless others to protect his family and team. After listening to Rick, Deanna considered him to be a principled person. Thus, she earnestly invited Rick to help the community survive. This time, Rick didn't refuse. It was only natural for them to have their own motives, so he decided to stay, handed over their weapons, with the agreement that they could retrieve them when going out. There's one small detail worth mentioning if you look closely at Carol. She appears clumsy. The women in charge of the warehouse management thought she was a weak woman who couldn't use a gun. After Carol puts down her weapon, she awkwardly smiles, with their weapons taken away. Rick looks at Carol. During the interview, Carol presents herself as the team's caretaker, only capable of doing laundry and cooking. Deanna has no idea that Carol is a terrifying person. Consequently, Deanna assigns Carol a job taking care of the elderly. The community also assigned Rick's team a house with unimaginable amenities, a mansion configuration that even before the end of the world their family didn't necessarily have such luxury. There's even running water, and Rick takes a hot shower. It had been a long time since Rick had taken care of himself. Looking at the man in the mirror, there is a vicissitude in his unkempt appearance. A few minutes later, Rick cleaned up his beard, and he looked completely transformed from before. Then, there's a knock at the door. Standing at the doorstep is an incredibly beautiful woman, delivering food to them. Rick, with his perfect physique and irresistible charm, managed to strike up a conversation with a woman. She introduced herself as Jessie, a former hairdresser who offered to give him a trim. He indeed needed to tidy up his hair. Rick didn't decline the offer. The two chatted for a while in the process. Jessie revealed that she was already married with 2 children. After a while, the 3 of them met up. Each person had been assigned a separate house to live in, but they were scattered quite far apart. Rick thought it would be wise for everyone to live together for the first couple of days. Later evening, Deanna arrived at the house and noticed that everyone was gathered there. She didn't say much, understanding their initial lack of trust. The next day, they decided to explore the community. It was very quiet all around and they wanted to get to know the place better. However, as Rick walked, he suddenly realized Carl was missing. There was no one else around, and he started to worry. In his anxious search, he accidentally broke something. Just then, Jessie appeared and reassured Rick not to panic. She assured him that there was no danger in this place. Eventually, they found Carl in front of a house. Jessie explained that these seniors had a great fondness for children, and it had been a long time since they had seen any babies around. Rick finally felt relieved and realized that he had been overly sensitive. Carl, in this new place, had also found peers of his age. He encountered 3 children who were around his age. They engrossed in reading and playing games. One of the girls seemed indifferent to his presence. Carl was impressed and instead a few more glances. His father asked him about the new friends he had made. Carl says he liked it here. He liked the people here too, but they are weak. He doesn't want them to become like that. Rick nodded, satisfied with his son's awareness of eschatology. In the afternoon, 2 individuals from the community, Deanna's son Aiden and his partner Nicholas, stopped Glenn and the other 2. They asked Glenn's group to join them in searching for supplies. Aiden bragged about his military training at university, how good he was. Follow them out and he can show them how to survive out there. Glenn couldn't help but think, how can they guide us on what to do outside? Shortly after, they entered the woods, and as they walked, Aiden took the opportunity to impart knowledge to the group, and also made childlike tactical arrangements. He emphasized the importance of obeying his commands, clearly feeling quite confident in himself. The 3 individuals didn't want to argue with a child, so they refrained from rebutting or challenging him. Their purpose for coming here was not to search for supplies, but to capture a specific zombie. This particular zombie had previously killed 4 members of their group, so they sought revenge. Soon, they arrived at the location where the zombie was being held, but it had managed to break free from its chains. Nicholas, however, began whistling. Glenn's group immediately became tense, knowing that this would attract nearby zombies. These 2 individuals were truly peculiar. Aiden instructed Glenn's group to simply watch from the sidelines. Soon, the zombie that Aiden was looking for appeared. They didn't intend to kill it immediately. Instead, they wanted to torment it by restraining it. He also told Noah, who was trying to help, to back off. However, the zombie's decaying skin made it difficult to hold onto, and Aiden saw the zombie lunge towards him. He pushed the zombie straight into Tara's arms. Nicholas is still around shouting, "Don't kill it." Tara struggled to hold the zombie back, and Glenn couldn't hold back any longer. He stabbed the zombie in the head. They erupted into conflict, but Glenn, being of a gentle nature, didn't want to stir up further trouble. Upon returning to the community, Aiden continued to taunt and mock Glenn's group, saying they lacked the courage and were unfit for the outside world. Glenn retorted directly, "You're probably saying the opposite." Aiden was not happy to hear this and shouted for Glenn to stop. However, Glenn paid no attention to him. He angrily questioned why they didn't follow his commands, claiming they had their own rules. The 2 men just argued and the residents around them gathered around to see what was going on. Glenn expressed that if they had listened to Aiden, they would have met the same fate as his previous teammates. Aiden's pride couldn't handle such a remark. Deanna, being drawn to the commotion, arrived at the scene. Aiden immediately complained, accusing Glenn of not following the rules, and questioning why his mother had brought these savages into the community.
Because we actually know what we're doing out there.
These people should be glad they didn't become Rick their enemy, otherwise they wouldn't dare be so arrogant and would be shaking in fear in the corner. At that moment, Rick arrived as well, urging Daryl to let it go. Michonne stood before Aiden and asked if he wanted to fight. Finally, the conflict ended when Rick and Deanna put a stop to it. Deanna, observing Rick's actions, appointed him and Michonne as the community's lawkeepers to maintain its safety, but without the use of firearms. Rick didn't refuse, understanding that they were living in someone else's territory. Later that night, the 3 of them gathered again. Rick wore his police uniform. The last time he wore it was a year ago. He suggested that they could settle down here and return to their respective houses to sleep. However, Carol expressed her concern that if they became too comfortable, they would let their guard down and become weak. Rick recalled Carl saying the same thing but assured Carol that they wouldn't become weak. Deanna used to be a congresswoman and appointed Rick and Michonne as lawkeepers. She even had fantasies of developing the community into a nation. However, Rick had no interest in her grandiose vision. He believed that these people only knew how to play politics within the community and had no understanding of the harsh realities outside. Rick directly suggested to Deanna that they needed to arm themselves and have people patrolling the walls every day. Zombies may not have thoughts, but nowadays, it's the humans who are the most dangerous. However, Deanna flatly rejected his suggestion, saying that the community was fine with the system governing it and did not need violent involvement. She mentioned that there would be a welcoming party at her house that evening and hoped everyone would attend. In the afternoon, Rick, Carol, and Daryl met outside to discuss matters privately. They believed that the people in the community lacked a sense of vigilance. They must have a weapon in their hands. Carol suggested that the handguns in the armory were rarely used, and even if a few were taken, no one would notice. They decided to find an opportunity to steal them. Their conversations are kept confidential and it is not considered necessary for other members to know. Carol's exceptional disguising skills came into play. She seamlessly integrated herself with the women of the community, who perceived her as a virtuous and delicate woman. Just then, Rick approached. Carol saw the party as an opportunity. Knowing that almost everyone would attend, she believed that slipping away during the event would give her a chance to obtain the handguns. Moreover, she was the most suitable person for the task, as no one would pay attention to someone as inconspicuous as her. Carol then went to the warehouse and told the woman she needed some ingredients to make biscuits and chatted in the meantime. At that moment, a group of men arrived, ready to take some weapons for their outing. The woman went in to take care of the registration, politely allowing Carol to retrieve the materials she needed on her own. Carol's acting skills were remarkable. After obtaining the ingredients, she calmly strolled into the armory, pretending to browse around. One of the men teasingly asked her if she was afraid of guns. Carol replied even more softly that she had a pistol outside, but she couldn't hit the zombies, couldn't even lift rifles like the ones in the armory. Saying this, she approached the window, and the men showed no suspicion. On the contrary, they enthusiastically offered to teach her how to shoot. Once everyone left, nobody noticed that the lock on the window had been tampered with. As evening approached, the preparations for the party were underway. Carol arrived with her cookies, followed by Rick, who was dressed handsomely. Abraham and Rosita were also dressed more formally. Tiana, accompanied by her husband Reg, walked over and introduced them to each other. Reg is the creator of the community wall and the founder of the community. The two of them engaged in casual conversation for a while. Rick's eyes were soon drawn to one person, naturally Jessie, who had just arrived. Bummed out that her two sons and husband are also here, most of them come to the party with their families, making Noah's solitary presence appear somewhat desolate. Fortunately, Glenn and Maggie approached him to offer comfort. Daryl also changed his clothes and stood by the door, observing for a while before leaving. Such gatherings were not quite suitable for him. Meanwhile, Carol and Rick were awaiting someone, the woman in charge of guarding the armory. When they spotted her entering, Carol initiated her plan. Before long, she made her way to the armory. Climbing in through the window, she proceeded to pack several handguns into a bag. Carol didn't expect a child to follow her. Jesse's youngest son Sam, he followed, hoping to get more biscuits. Didn't expect to follow here. Carol enthusiastically offered to bake him a whole oven full of biscuits, but Sam had to promise not to tell anyone she'd been here, especially his mother. Carol warned Sam that if he were to tell her, the next day he would wake up outside the walls, tied to a tree, with no one coming to rescue him. The monsters will come to get him. After hearing Carol's words of coaxing and threatening, Sam promised not to tell anyone. The next day, Carol discreetly brought the firearms out, while Rick concealed a small handgun behind him. They nonchalantly returned to the community as if nothing had happened. In the afternoon, Aiden prepared to go out again with Glenn and the others. They arrived at a warehouse in search of supplies, without mentioning their previous unpleasant encounter. After a thorough inspection, they discovered numerous zombies blocking the main entrance of the warehouse. They had no choice but to sneak in from the back. Glenn knocked on the door with force, but there was no response from inside. The group cautiously entered with their weapons ready. The warehouse was filled with goods, and they had to split up to investigate further. As they walked, they could faintly hear the growls of zombies. Based on Glenn's experience, it seemed that the zombies were being obstructed by something. When came inside, there was a door that separated some zombies. There must be at least 20 to 30 of them. However, Glenn remained calm, assessing the security of the iron door. It appeared to be sturdy enough, allowing them to search for supplies without worry. Aiden felt a bit nervous but couldn't help but admire the abilities of Glenn and the others. All of this is built up from experience. Tara and Eugene, on the other side, also found the necessary materials for ensuring the community's power supply. At that moment, a zombie approached Aiden from behind. When he turned around, he saw a fully armed soldier. Somewhat alarmed, he fired straight away, but this zombie was wearing a helmet. Glenn outside the rack also noticed the zombie and told Aiden to stop and get closer before aiming for the neck to kill it. However, in an attempt to prove himself, Aiden shot the zombie in the leg. It was then that Glenn carefully observed the fallen zombie and urgently shouted for Aiden to stop. As the zombie was carrying a grenade, tragedy struck as a small explosion knocked down several people. After a few minutes, Glenn regained his feet and quickly checked on the others. Sadly, Aiden had been impaled by the shelves and appeared lifeless. Glenn was a little sorry. At this point the zombies also came out, and he hurriedly called out the names of the others. Fortunately, Noah was unharmed. Upon hearing Eugene's voice, they ran towards him. Eugene was intact, but Tara had suffered a severe head injury and had lost consciousness. Glenn asked Eugene to give them cover. The two of them took Tara away. Eugene's hands were trembling uncontrollably. He was really too timid. Just as he hesitated, a zombie pounced on him from the side. Fortunately, Glenn came to his rescue in time. Now they had to evacuate quickly. The group temporarily hid in an office. Tara's condition was not optimistic, and she was losing blood too quickly. The medical supplies were only in the car. They had to get her into the car as soon as possible. Just as they were preparing to retreat, shouts could be heard from outside. "Oh my God! Aiden was still alive." He was crying out for help. Nicholas did not want to risk saving him at this time, but after repeated requests from everyone, he no longer objected. At this moment, Eugene became much braver. He promised to take good care of Tara. He had always liked Tara a lot. Glenn didn't hesitate anymore either. He temporarily commanded Nicholas to launch a signal flare to attract the zombies. Then he and Noah would fight their way out. After the three of them were ready, led by Glenn, they opened the door. Eugene also changed from his usual cowardice. He whispered to Tara to hold on. Then he looked at the open door outside and secretly made up his mind to get Tara out. He carefully opened the door. Fortunately, the zombies had been drawn away by them. He gasped nervously and headed outside. Whenever he encountered a zombie, he suppressed his fear and killed it. Glenn also arrived at Aiden's location. His situation was even more dire. 2 steel pipes pierced through his body. Glenn comforted him, telling him not to be afraid, assuring him that they would save him, but he warned him to endure the pain and not make a sound. Aiden nodded. However, the process was incredibly painful, and he unintentionally let out a scream. Glenn had no choice but to ask Nicholas to try again. The zombies have followed the sound and are approaching the area. Noah is killing zombies with a pistol, while Nicholas had already lost his composure. He whispered in Aiden's ear, "I'm just trying to save myself. Don't blame me. We've all abandoned teammates before." After saying that, he ran away. Glenn couldn't stop him either. He alone couldn't save Aiden. More and more zombies were closing in. Aiden knew he would not survive. He said to Glenn, "Last time, Nicholas and I abandoned our teammates. Now it's my retribution. You guys should leave quickly." There is no way. A large group of zombies had already surrounded them. Noah could only pull Glenn away, and in the end, the zombies devoured Aiden. Meanwhile, Nicholas had also run to the lobby. Glenn and Noah followed closely behind. When they reached the outside, they saw zombies waiting for them. The zombies from inside gradually made their way to the lobby as well. After firing a few shots, their magazines were empty. The two of them had no choice but to run towards the exit. In the end, they, along with Nicholas, became trapped in the revolving glass doors at the same time, facing the onslaught of zombies. The three of them took refuge in a revolving glass door. The situation was extremely perilous, with zombies waiting both inside and outside. Nicholas was panicking inside the door, and Glenn had run out of bullets. It was only a matter of time before the glass shattered. He calmed down and started thinking about what to do. It seemed like a dead end. At that moment, they heard a car horn outside. Glenn looked outside and saw Eugene driving towards them for support. The car's speakers were playing music, and Eugene was shouting loudly. The zombies outside were quickly drawn away, greatly relieving the pressure on the three of them. However, now they faced another problem. In order to open the door and go outside, someone on the other side would be left inside. Glenn couldn't bring himself to sacrifice his teammate. He called out to Nicholas, comforting him and urging him to stay calm. After the two of them had secured the door with force, Glenn began using the butt of his gun to strike the glass. The first hit was too weak, but on the second attempt, Nicholas' side of the door swung open a crack. That idiot hadn't secured the revolving door properly. Being inexperienced, he became even more anxious and had to forcefully close the door again. Glenn reassured him, telling him to apply more force while securing the door. It was their only option now. When Glenn counted to 3, Nicholas forcefully pushed the door, creating a gap. He was determined to run outside. However, this meant that he would be leading the zombies towards Glenn and the others, essentially sacrificing them. Glenn was also in a panic. shouting at Nicholas not to do it. The idiot tries harder to get out. Meanwhile, Noah had already been grabbed by the zombies, with their hands reaching inside. In the end, Nicholas managed to escape, but Noah was dragged away by the zombies right in front of Glenn's eyes. He let out a helpless scream of pain as he watched Noah being torn apart by the zombies. Glenn felt a deep sense of guilt for not taking care of this kind-hearted boy. On the other hand, Eugene had managed to shake off the zombies and was slowly walking towards them. Nicholas approached him, saying, "We have to go." He opened the door to the driver's seat, while Eugene, uncharacteristically assertive, took away the car keys, asking where their people were. Nicholas threatened him directly, saying, "Either come with me or die here, it's your choice." Just as Eugene was about to pull out his gun, Nicholas pushed him to the ground and swiftly started the car, ready to leave. To his surprise, Glenn chased after them and pulled Nicholas down, delivering 2 powerful punches. Eugene, looking at the sorrowful Glenn, realized what had happened. On their way back, Glenn was in no mood to talk. It's been a really bad day. Tara was injured, and Noah was also bitten to death by a zombie because of that bastard. During their absence, other things had happened within the community as well. Abraham had been assigned to their team, and they had gone out to a construction site to gather materials for expanding the walls. The community needed those supplies for its expansion. However, Abraham was not quite accustomed to this kind of life. In comparison, he preferred wielding a gun outside, killing zombies. At that moment, a group of zombies emerged from the woods. Everyone grabbed their guns and started shooting. Since the apocalypse began, they have always lived within the confines of the wall, and their marksmanship was largely improvised. Abraham quickly joined the fray. This was his battlefield. Tobin, the leader, kills the zombies under the excavator, but he didn't expect to blow the pressure arm of the excavator. The woman on guard above fell off. The zombies were only 3 or 4 meters away from her. Tobin was terrified and ordered everyone to retreat behind the truck, believing that the woman was beyond saving. However, Abraham took action. He stepped forward and shot down the 2 closest zombies before pulling the woman to safety. Just as they were about to retreat, more zombies approached from another direction. With no other choice, Abraham had the woman hide inside the truck while he remained in place. When everyone thought he would die, Abraham managed to escape from under the vehicle and shot the zombies crawling beneath it. Calmly, he handed his gun to the woman, instructing her to provide cover fire from the outside. Meanwhile, he picked up a meteor hammer. Killing zombies in close quarters was his specialty, and it was only a matter of time before they were eliminated. The only setback was that the woman's shooting skills were wasting ammunition. A man who had been observing from the back was in awe. They couldn't believe that Abraham had survived. Tobin urged the man to retreat, but he was so stunned by Abraham's actions that he decided not to back down. He grabbed his gun and charged forward. At the end, Abraham gives Tobin a straightforward lecture, abandoning her teammates, leaving her in place to die. Tobin tried to argue. The woman comes up and punches him in the face. The men came up to make peace, tell them to stop fighting, come back to work tomorrow. But Abraham thinks the zombie encounter was just a hiccup. Why not work? He then went straight to work assigning tasks. He took even better precautions. Anyone of Rick's team is a great leader out there. Tobin is a good guy. He just didn't have the experience of surviving a post-apocalyptic world. The first thing he did when he got back was find Deanna. He resigned as captain. He thought Abraham was more than capable, and he doesn't hesitate to praise him. He also blames himself for almost getting a woman killed. Maggie is pleased that the people in her team are fully capable of doing the job. Deanna agreed to Tobin's resignation, although she had some concerns about granting too much power to Rick and his group. Meanwhile, Carol found herself still being sought out by Sam, the young boy she had threatened. Carol, despite her fondness for children, was reluctant to form emotional attachments too easily in the current circumstances. She had maintained a cold and distant demeanor, even instructing Sam not to speak to her. However, Sam was a chatterbox who seemed to enjoy being around her. Sam continued to enjoy visiting her and had even managed to sneak some chocolate for making cookies. Carol's compassionate side started to stir, and she gradually softened her demeanor and took an active interest in him. Sam told her why he was here. He actually wanted to ask Carol for a gun. Carol inquired about the reason, wanting to know why Sam wanted the handgun. Sam simply replied that it wasn't for himself. Clearly there is something that cannot be said. Carol realized that this was a significant problem and was eager to find out what he intended to do. However, Sam refused to say anything further and ran out the door. Feeling concerned, Carol couldn't shake off her worries and decided to knock on Sam's house door. It was his father who opened the door, and the man dodged a little, as if he was afraid Carol would see what was happening inside. Eventually, he abruptly closed the door without any courtesy. Carol had already guessed what had happened. She then sought out Rick and informed him that Sam's mother, Jessie, was likely experiencing domestic violence regularly, which explained why the child wanted a gun to protect her. Carol empathized with the situation, as she had experienced something similar in her past. What's even more surprising is that Gabriel managed to find Deanna and expressed his desire to talk to her privately. Noticing that there was no one else inside the house, he began rambling about God and demons. He mentioned that their community was like a paradise and that he was very grateful to be here. However, he believed that Deanna's mistake was allowing others, particularly Rick and his group, to enter. Gabriel claimed that they were all bad people, and that they had done unimaginable, atrocious things. Deanna responded that Rick had mentioned these things during the previous conversation and acknowledged that they had to do something in order to survive. However, she didn't believe that Rick was without principles. Gabriel, still persevering, wears a resigned expression as if Rick and his team have done something terrible to him. He continued trying to convince Deanna not to trust them. Gabriel had previously caused the deaths of many of his followers. Rick's group was aware of his actions, therefore, he attempted to find ways to drive them away. Deanna didn't fully trust Gabriel's one-sided account, just said she would think about it and let him go. Maggie, as Deanna's assistant, often stays in her house and overhears Gabriel's words. Deanna, after listening to him and considering the power dynamics, began to question the rightness of accepting Rick's group. But at that moment, there was a shout from outside. Glenn and the others had returned. The death of her son had left Deanna's family in a state of silence. Even her husband Reg was in tears. After Nicholas returned, he recounted the events leading to Aiden's death. He sorrowfully explained that Aiden had been shooting at a zombie while trying to save them. However, Glenn intentionally distracted him, resulting in an explosion. Aiden didn't die, but he was severely injured. Nicholas insisted on saving him, but they all abandoned him and he had no choice. Then, as we entered the hall, we were trapped in the revolving door. To escape, they pushed me towards the zombies. During each interview, Deanna recorded everything and watched the footage closely. Would she believe Nicholas' words based on the recorded evidence? Deanna learned of her son's tragic death, and surprisingly, she didn't pursue the matter further. At that moment, Rick arrived not to console her but to discuss how to handle Jesse's domestic abuse situation. During their conversation, Rick was taken aback when he realized that Deanna had known about it all along. It seemed that domestic abuse had been ongoing, but Pete, Jesse's husband, was a surgeon. Such talents are very important in a post-apocalyptic world. It wasn't worth provoking him, and Tara was treated by him for her injury. Rick couldn't understand why they would tolerate domestic abuse just because Pete was a doctor. He feared that Jesse might end up dead the next time. Rick proposed his own solution to Deanna, urging her to consider it. He believed that separating Jesse and Pete would be the best course of action, and if Pete refused, they should execute him directly.
We exile him, if it comes to that.
Rick was speechless. Deanna had no understanding of the cruelty of the outside world. People who had been exiled would undoubtedly harbor resentment and could potentially bring harm to their community. The two of them got into an argument. Deanna told Rick to stop making these barbaric proposals. Killing cannot exist in their communities. It was evident that she already has a big problem with Rick's team. Rick chose not to say anything further. He knew he couldn't leave this place. He would take over if he had to. Afterward, Rick went to Jesse's house. He was straightforward and made it clear that he knew about Pete's abusive behavior. This kind of behavior had to stop. Jessie was taken aback. There were already tears of anguish in her eyes. However, she still defended her husband, claiming that he had changed and that she would persuade him to stop. She can handle this. Rick knew it was practically impossible. He persisted in expressing his desire to help her, which surprised Jessie. She asked him why he cared if she ended up getting killed. Rick was momentarily stunned for a couple of seconds, realizing that he had developed feelings for her. He was about to say what was on his mind.
I'm married.
And that was the end of their conversation. As Rick walked along the road, his heart pounded. Being seen through just now made him a little nervous. He thought about it again and looked at Sam playing outside. He decided he couldn't leave it alone. Taking a deep breath, he returned to Jesse's house. Jesse clearly didn't want to discuss the matter any further. Rick directly said, Do you know your son went to someone else to get a gun to protect you? Jessie instantly broke down upon hearing Rick's words. The reason she had refused Rick's help was to avoid further angering her husband. She felt a deep sense of powerlessness in her family. Rick went on to say that the situation within the community is no different from the world outside. They had food to eat and houses to live in, but they couldn't just settle for a compromised existence. You can't always endure silently and swallow your pride. He emphasized that if she ended up getting killed, what would happen to her children? Domestic violence wouldn't end without resistance. Jessie finally absorbed what Rick was saying. Her son's actions had deeply touched her. Rick then confessed, saying, "I don't want you to die either. I can protect you and your son's safety. You just need to nod and agree to let me help you." Jessie understood his intentions, so she asked, "Would you do the same for someone else? Would you go all out for someone else?" She was direct in her questioning. Rick whispered, "No." That's when Jessie indicated her agreement and said, "I agree to let you help me." Just as she finished speaking, her husband, Pete, emerged from the room and asked Rick, "Why are you here? If there's nothing important, I'll have to ask you to leave." Rick didn't respond. Instead, Jessie, this time, firmly opposed her husband. Pete was shocked that she dared to defy him, especially in front of others.
Just go, Pete.
What are you talking about?
Jessie went on to say that it was you who should leave. Pete immediately realized that Rick must have said something to her. He started shouting at her. Rick said flatly, "Let's go out and sort this out."
You come into my house.
Pete, you and me are leaving.
You're leaving right now. You think you're the law? You actually think you have a say in anything here?
Step back.
Who the hell do you think you are?
Someone's trying not to kill you.
The two men immediately wrestled with each other. They exchanged a couple of punches, and eventually crashed through a window onto the street. The commotion attracted everyone's attention, and as they arrived, they saw both of them covered in blood. Jessie attempted to intervene, but she received a slap in the face. Rick couldn't take it anymore and just exploded, regaining the initiative. He grabbed Pete by the neck. If he hadn't restrained himself, he might have killed him right then and there. Deanna rushed over and pleaded with Rick to stop. Others tried to approach, but Rick pulled out a hidden handgun. With his bloodied face and his actions, he appeared truly unhinged. He angrily turned to Deanna and said, "You still don't understand. None of you understand this world. We know what needs to be done, and we never hesitate. We have survived step by step to this point. You all just sit inside your walls, making plans and hesitating. Deanna, you pretend to know everything, but you don't know shit. You all just wish this world wasn't like this. Do you want to survive? Do you want this place to endure? Your ways have long ended. Things don't get better just because they're imaginary. From now on, we have to live in reality." Before he could finish, Michonne attacked him from behind. She was also one of the community's law enforcement officers and someone who wanted to stay and live a peaceful life. The next day, Rick woke up, feeling a bit dizzy. His wounds had been treated. He carefully surveyed his surroundings, realizing that he was in an unfamiliar place. To his surprise, Michonne was there. She had been watching over him all night. Michonne is puzzled by Rick's behavior because she wanted to stay and live a peaceful life in the community. Rick said calmly at this point, "Things were moving too fast. Noah had another incident. That's why it was so extreme." At that moment, Glenn and the others arrived.
Where'd you get the gun?
Before Rick could answer, Carol spoke first. "You took it from the armory, didn't you? That was a foolish act. Why did you do it?" Rick understood. Carol didn't want to expose herself. To remain a transparent person, he wouldn't reveal her secret. Glenn mentioned that Deanna was planning a meeting tonight, and everyone could attend. It seemed like they would discuss exiling Rick. Carol advised Rick to use the opportunity at the meeting to speak sincerely, adopt a remorseful attitude, and come up with a compelling story. Michonne was puzzled about why they had to go to such lengths. Carol bluntly stated that the people here were like children who enjoyed hearing stories. Rick made up his mind that if things didn't go well at the meeting, they would follow his signal. It was clear that without bloodshed, they wouldn't learn how to survive. Michonne still believed in the possibility of resolving the matter peacefully. It's clear that she and Glenn don't want to do this. They had adapted to this way of life. However, Carol unconditionally supported Rick. In a post-apocalyptic world, democracy simply does not work. Then Rick sent them away. Rick claimed he needed to rest for a while. When they had all gone, Carol came back again and said it was fine now. Everyone thought they had taken your gun. As she spoke, she handed another gun to Rick. Rick asked why she didn't let them know she had a gun. Carol didn't shy away from the truth and said that Michonne stopped him and even knocked him unconscious. She was more inclined toward Deanna's side. It was still a long time before the evening meeting. Unbeknownst to Rick, his old friend had arrived nearby. Morgan was about to make his formal appearance. A man brewed a cup of coffee for dinner tonight. In the midst of it, a man emerged from the woods, armed with a gun. It was not uncommon to encounter such situations in this post-apocalyptic world, where people fought over resources. Morgan remained calm, showing a keen interest in the letters on the man's forehead. He asked about their meaning without any signs of panic. The man, not in a rush, patiently explained that it represented the vengeance of the wolves. Morgan smiled and listened attentively, his expression unperturbed. Just as he was about to take a sip of his coffee, he was halted. The man claimed that everything now belonged to him. Morgan calmly stated, "You can have all my belongings, but could you leave me with a little something? Give me a 2-day buffer period." The man replied, "You're thinking too much. Even your body I will take, and you won't survive." Upon hearing these words, Morgan's gaze turned cold. While he didn't mind giving away his possessions to these people, it didn't mean he was weak. Just as he was about to reach for his weapon, the man warned him with his handgun, telling him not to move. This action only attracted Morgan's attention. Meanwhile, his other companion attempted to attack from behind. However, Morgan's reflexes were equally swift. He evaded the attack and counterattacked, driving the two assailants back. Morgan advised them to leave quickly, as he didn't want to escalate the situation further. They were beaten 2-1. They naturally couldn't accept this. Immediately, they launched another joint attack on Morgan. Yet, the outcome remained the same. They were beaten back once again. Morgan's fighting skills are undoubtedly top-notch in the post-apocalyptic world. Both men felt a sense of shame at being knocked back for the second time. Still, Morgan remained composed and urged them to leave. But as they rushed forward once more, he made it clear that he wouldn't hold back. This time, he increased the intensity of his strikes and targeted their vulnerable spots. Morgan picked up the man's handgun and looked at the distant zombies. With a calm demeanor, he pulled the trigger, but the gun was empty. No wonder these two individuals didn't use their guns right away. Both of them survived and were thrown into the back seat by Morgan. He then honked the horn, leaving them to fend for themselves. On the nearby road, a handsome man rides a motorbike, with Aaron following behind. Both of them were recruiters for the community, seeking good people to join. They rode through a forest and came across a survivor wearing a red raincoat. After applying something on himself, the survivor left. Instead of immediately greeting him, Morgan and Aaron decided to observe him discreetly. They followed him until they reached a canning factory where many zombies were present, but the man's trail was nowhere to be found. They had lost track of him. Aaron thought for a moment. Although they had lost track of the person, but it's hard to come across a cannery, there must be a lot of food inside. There was bound to be a lot of food inside. They dealt with the zombies at the entrance and began entering the factory. As they entered, they noticed several large trucks, presumably used for transporting goods. The can's logo was printed on them. If they contained food, they could sustain themselves for at least a year or two. Daryl inspected the area and found nothing suspicious. That's when he opened the tailgate of one of the trucks to investigate. However, he quickly realized something was wrong. It was a trap. Opening one would trigger other mechanisms, and all the truck doors swung open. They were filled with zombies. The two quickly fled, but outside they found themselves surrounded by a horde of zombies. They had no choice but to hide under a car. Escaping seemed almost impossible. Each of the zombies had the letter W on their foreheads. Daryl pulled Aaron and searched for an opening to escape. They had to simultaneously walk and kill, as being surrounded by dozens of zombies at once would be disastrous. As they made their way through, there are just too many zombies. They had no choice but to take shelter inside a car. There were at least 60 zombies surrounding the vehicle in the yard. Strangely, the zombies inside the car were only upper bodies, clearly indicating a trap set by someone. Daryl could only comfort Aaron, hoping that something would pass by and attract some of the zombies away. At that moment, Aaron found a piece of paper inside the car. Upon opening it, they both understood that it was a trap set by someone using the canning factory. Daryl pondered for a moment. Continuing like this would only result in broken glass and certain death. It was better to open the car door and take a chance. Just as they decided to count down from 3, they heard a commotion outside. Someone was killing the zombies. Aaron hesitated for 2 seconds and quickly opened the door to take action. The person coming to their rescue was none other than Morgan. Seeing people trapped, he rushed in without hesitation. With his help, Aaron and Daryl found some space to move. In just 1 minute, The three of them broke through and reached the entrance. They swiftly closed the door, thankfully finding only one zombie inside. Daryl eliminated it with a single arrow. Aaron, still shaken, expressed his gratitude to Morgan and introduced himself. Daryl was also curious and asked why Morgan saved them. Morgan, true to his compassionate nature, stated that all lives are precious. After listening, Daryl remained silent, admiring Morgan's mindset and enlightenment. Aaron saw that he wasn't a bad guy, and rushed to say that the people who had set the trap would probably be here soon. We had a community. You could join us. However, Morgan politely declined, stating that he had a specific destination in mind but had gotten lost. He pulled out a map and asked for their help in figuring out the route. Daryl took the map and upon seeing it, he immediately recognized it. It was the map they had left behind at the church. There were 2 lines of text written on it. The map was left to Rick by Abraham on his way out, with a couple of apologies. Little did they expect that Morgan would find it. His purpose in this journey was to go to Washington, D.C., to find Rick. Daryl looked at him in disbelief. Meanwhile, in the community, as mentioned in the previous episode, Rick had fought with Pete. Both of them were now in their respective rooms. Cooling down, Carol approached Pete's room and he rudely questioned her, using profanity, asking why the hell she was there. Carol straightforwardly told him that Tara was injured and he, being a doctor, was responsible as he had treated her before. Pete found it interesting that he had been beaten by them and now they wanted him to provide them with medical care. Carol didn't try to persuade him any further. Instead, she took out a dagger from her pocket, indicated that she could kill him now. At first, Pete found it laughable, asking if she would really dare to kill him. "I'll really kill you," whispered Carol, "and then who would believe I could kill someone? And then I'll say I was kind enough to bring you food and you want to beat me up instead." Pete was indeed afraid now. One common characteristic of an abusive man is that they bully the weak but fear the strong. Carol's assertiveness had left Pete feeling submissive and compliant. Carol withdrew her knife and she said, "You hit me!" Where does Pete dare to strike? He only bullies the weak. Facing Carol's provocation, Pete had no choice but to admit his wrongdoing. Carol knew she had achieved her goal and continued, "If you continue with this attitude, you still have a chance to survive. From now on, you will live here. Your wife is across the way." With that, Carol handed the food to Pete, turned around, and left the room. Once Carol was gone, Pete threw the food she had given him onto the floor in a fit of anger. He stormed into the house and started smashing things. Meanwhile, at the community's main gate, Father Gabriel unexpectedly decided to venture out alone. He had a serious and resolute expression, devoid of his usual cowardice. He made his way into the nearby woods and started whistling, intending to attract the attention of the zombies. Gabriel always felt he had sinned so much. He had previously slandered Rick and the others in front of Deanna, trying to hide his own misdeeds. Now, he sought to be killed by zombies as a way to atone for his past mistakes. Gabriel outstretched his arms and shouted loudly, "I'm ready!" The zombies heard the sound and began approaching him. However, Gabriel's resolve wavered when he saw the zombies' bloodthirsty appearance. His inherent cowardice resurfaced, and he faltered. In the end, Gabriel used brutal means to kill the zombie, even pelting it with stones. After completing this act, he broke down in tears. Guilt torments him on the one hand and the lack of courage to atone for his sins on the other. After a while, Gabriel still returned to the community. The gate was being guarded by Deanna's eldest son. He was just about to leave for evening meeting. He wasn't cautious enough, letting Gabriel close the door behind him. Gabriel looks like everyone owes him 500 million. Then he yanked the door up hard, not caring whether it was closed or not. With a blank expression, he walked inside. As the evening grew darker, the meeting was about to commence. Rick had equipped himself with the handgun Carol had given him, prepared for a potentially explosive situation. He glanced out the window, sensing that something was amiss. Hurriedly, he made his way to the front door, only to discover that it hadn't been locked. It was an extremely dangerous situation. Rick approached the door cautiously and found no one outside. However, there were remnants of flesh and blood on the steel pipe near the entrance, along with a few bloodstains on the ground. He realized that a walker must have gotten inside. Without wasting any time, Rick quickly closed and secured the door. He knew he had to find the walker before anyone got hurt. Meanwhile, most of the community members had gathered together, ready to begin the meeting. Deanna couldn't wait for Rick any longer. His presence or absence wouldn't make much of a difference at this point. The meeting commenced, and Deanna brought up the topic of their community's constable, Rick. She accused him of stealing a handgun and pointing it at their own people. Initially, she hoped Rick would be present to explain, but he didn't show up. Michonne and Carol spoke up, assuring everyone that Rick had promised to attend and that he must have been delayed due to some important matter. At this moment, Rick was indeed still searching for zombies within the community. Suddenly, he heard the sound of a dog barking from inside. Maybe the dog had spotted something. Rick quickly drew his knife and rushed towards the sound. As he entered, he saw the dog barking towards the outside. While Rick observed his surroundings, a zombie appeared. Dealing with just one was easy for him. However, another zombie approached him, pushing him aside. Then another one lunged at him, but Rick swiftly stabbed it with his knife. A tall zombie approached him next, knocking Rick down. Its weight was overwhelming, and Rick could only use his hands to hold its head and prevent it from biting him. Rick, who really didn't have the strength, ended up having to stab the zombie through the jaw with his hand. That's how he managed to kill it, though he was left covered in a significant amount of blood. Fortunately, he survived. Meanwhile, during the meeting, everyone was expressing their opinions about Rick. Michonne spoke about their previous struggles for survival outside and how living in the community provided a different life. Rick's only wish was for his family and everyone to survive. She asked if they found his current state terrifying and lacking rationality, but she assured them that this was what they would become in the future. The community's luck couldn't remain favorable forever. Carol then spoke up in defense of Rick. She mentioned how he had saved her life multiple times and how there were terrifying people outside that they couldn't imagine. Rick had rescued many people from their hands. People like her, especially those who hesitated, needed someone like Rick. She acknowledged that the incident of him hitting someone was frightening, and they might find it hard to accept, but they really needed to listen to his advice. Abraham, known for his explosive temper, also chimed in. He emphasized that there were too many terrifying things outside, and yet they knew nothing about them. But Rick was well versed in these matters. And even beyond that, Maggie also stood up for Rick. My father has great respect for Rick. He is a father himself and has a kind heart. Those of us who have been with him from the beginning, no matter when we met, we are now a family. We have survived because of Rick's leadership. You can't stop us, and you can't do what Rick does. This community, all of you, are one big family. With Rick, you will feel incredibly fortunate. Deanna listened to Rick's teammates praising him and raised another question. She shared that Gabriel, the priest, had come to her 2 days ago, claiming that they couldn't trust the newcomers as they were dangerous and would prioritize their own interests over the community's. In less than a day, Rick had violently attacked Pete with a gun. How could this be explained? Now, neither Rick nor Pete were present, so they couldn't confront each other. Tobin, as an elder of the community, had intended to speak up, but he was taken aback as he looked outside. Rick, covered in blood, was holding a corpse and threw the zombie right in front of everyone. This terrified them, and they thought Rick had gone mad. Most of them were afraid of him. Rick, breathing heavily, explained that it was the consequence of not having patrol guards. The door was left wide open. Rick continued to address the crowd. The zombies weren't brought in by him. They slipped in through the door on their own. Regardless, they would always come. Whether they were zombies or people, they lived on the inside. And there were many deranged people outside who coveted their resources, taking advantage of their sympathy. But he would kill them. They could survive, but only if they were willing to let him teach them. Rick had been contemplating how many people he would have to kill tonight to save their minds, but he decided not to do it that way. They had to make a change. He didn't regret what he said to them yesterday. He regretted not telling them sooner. They had to be ready to face the end of the world, rather than engaging in political democracy inside. Luck would eventually run out. At that moment, Pete walked in with a long knife, loudly berating Rick. Reg rushes forward to intercept. Rick didn't pay any attention to such a bully who only targeted the weak. Rick didn't mind using him to test the knife. However, to his surprise, the hot-headed Pete directly slit Reg's throat. Deanna screamed in shock, and everyone was astonished. Abraham subdued Pete, but Reg only struggled for a few seconds before he stopped breathing. Deanna was devastated, and finally realized the need for change. She called out to Rick, and he understood. He had just finished firing when he heard someone call out to him from across the... Looking up, he saw it was Morgan. The 5th season ended here, but what they didn't know was that the trap in the canned food warehouse had been set by the 2 people who were previously dealt with by Morgan during the day. They were deranged and returned to find the situation like this. Knowing that someone had taken the bait, they pressed a switch, and the speakers inside the car started playing, attracting the zombies back inside. A few minutes later, the trap was set again. The 2 individuals discovered a backpack on the ground. It belonged to Aaron and had pictures of the community inside. This would be their next target. A man takes a deep breath. aiming at his zombified wife. He had hoped to end it all and start anew, but Morgan couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger. It was this moment of hesitation that led to tragedy. His son encountered his mother turned zombie during a search for supplies, and he couldn't bring himself to shoot. Ultimately, his son lost his life. Since then, Morgan has been consumed by grief and self-hatred for not pulling the trigger. Slowly, his mental state deteriorates, and he becomes increasingly delusional and irritable. This episode serves as a prelude to Morgan's character development in the upcoming storyline. It explains why he has such a powerful fighting force and shows a good nature. As Morgan descends into madness, he roams the area day after day. Any zombie that comes near him is ruthlessly slain. He hates zombies. He also hates everything in this world. He heaps up and burns all the corpses as if these actions could alleviate his guilt. In the days to come, the area where he burned the zombies was filled with spears as a temporary living quarters. This madman not only shows no mercy towards the zombies but also becomes merciless towards other humans. Anyone who comes near him is coldly killed. Within Morgan resides a demon he can no longer control. His actions are driven by an uncontrollable force. He continues to live this life day in and day out, killing heaps of zombies. Almost everyone who has encountered him has met their demise. Morgan arrived at a picturesque location, but slowly, he began experiencing hallucinations, as if he was battling a demon within him. It wasn't until a distant goat's cry snapped him back to reality. Immediately, he followed the sound to investigate. There, he discovered various containers set up as alarm devices, indicating the presence of someone. Morgan cautiously approached the area. As he took a few steps, noticed that the sound is getting louder. In front of him were two wooden houses with a small sheep pen in the yard. Morgan carefully surveyed his surroundings and, finding no one, he stealthily prepared to take the sheep with him. Just as he was about to reach for it, a man's voice interrupted him. The voice lacked malicious intent, using a gentle tone to persuade, but Morgan couldn't see where the person was. The man cautiously revealed himself, only to be greeted by a barrage of gunfire. It didn't matter who you were, the man's voice continued, suggesting that Morgan should lower his weapon and share a meal. Judging by his appearance, Morgan seemed to have been wandering for a long time. Morgan paid no attention to his nonsense. The man could not imagine how dangerous Morgan was in that moment. He persistently tried to persuade Morgan with his voice that he wanted him to be friendly. Seeing that Morgan was resolute,
Sorry.
when Morgan woke up, he found himself lying on the ground with food nearby but locked in a cage. At that moment, the man entered, walking and questioning Morgan about his information. However, Morgan had only 3 words to say.
Kill me.
The man walked over and tossed a book to Morgan, introducing himself as Eastman. Just as he finished speaking, there was a commotion outside, likely caused by zombies triggering the alarm system. Curious, Morgan looked outside and witnessed the man's impressive agility, especially his extraordinary skill with the stick. It was this man who became a turning point in Morgan's life. In the days that followed, Morgan received a daily portion of food and continued to mutter to himself. Eastman remained busy with his own tasks, seemingly understanding Morgan's state. Each day, Morgan would watch the man exercise his staff skills in the morning, silently memorizing a few moves in his mind. He never opened the book on the floor. Time passed, and the man's life remained mundane, repeating the same routine every day. Gradually, Morgan grew calmer. Eventually, Eastman took the time to have a proper conversation with him. He knew Morgan was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and the reason for keeping him locked up was because he saw a reflection of his own past in him. Eastman wanted to help Morgan reintegrate into real life. Eastman opened the cell door, allowing Morgan to leave whenever he wished. However, Morgan's first action upon exiting was to attack Eastman. The two wrestled with each other, with Morgan acting like a raging bull, blindly charging forward. In the end, Morgan even shattered a painting on the wall. Eastman no longer showed mercy and swiftly gained the upper hand. Looking at the broken words on the ground, the only remnant left by his daughter, Eastman almost couldn't resist delivering a fatal blow, but he restrained himself. Eastman didn't lock Morgan away anymore. None of it seemed to matter, but Morgan walked back in on his own accord. Eastman picked up the painting from the floor and left the house. In the evening, while Eastman was working on something, he spoke to Morgan, introducing him to the staff style called Aikido, a peaceful martial art. The next day, Eastman went out to search for supplies. Finally, Morgan opened the book that had been lying there. The book stated that Aikido was the way of non-killing. Even when facing the most wicked individuals, one must completely avoid taking lives. Eastman believed in these principles, and that's why Morgan had managed to survive until now. It touched something inside Morgan. At that moment, the alarm outside started ringing, and the sound of the small sheep grew louder. Morgan couldn't ignore it. He took the initiative and rushed outside, dealing with 2 zombies, and then sat down on the ground, lost in thought. It was his clearest moment in a long time. Eastman noticed Morgan's progress and praised him, thanking him as well. When he got back inside, Eastman pulled out a spearhead and said, "This is the one you used to use. I cut the spearhead off. You don't need it anymore." He then handed him a well-crafted staff, a modification of his long spear. Morgan looked at it and then accepted it. The man's magnanimity earned Morgan's admiration and respect. This staff became one of Morgan's most important weapons. In the days that followed, Morgan started learning how to cultivate the land, embracing the tranquility of this new life. Eastman imparted the teachings of Aikido to Morgan, hoping to help him quell the violence within his heart. Every life has value, and this is what makes Morgan's compassion so compassionate. He believed that even the most wicked individuals could undergo transformation, just as he had. If it weren't for his mentor giving him a chance, Morgan would have perished long ago. Morgan's skills with the staff also improved day by day, occasionally gaining the upper hand in combat. Though they didn't have a formal master-disciple relationship, Eastman held nothing back and would impart wisdom to Morgan during their leisure moments. He understood that Morgan wasn't inherently evil but rather trapped within his own world. One day, Eastman mentioned the need for more supplies, such as waterproof fabric and pry bars, which could be found at the nearby beach. Morgan indicated that he knew where there was one, and naturally the place he said was where he had been stationed before. They swiftly arrived at the location, and luckily, Morgan's backpack was still there, containing the waterproof fabric they sought. The surrounding spears served as their pry bars. As they gathered the supplies, Eastman took notice of the various writings Morgan had left behind and gently inquired about his wife and son. He wanted Morgan to confront and accept this painful truth. Witnessing Morgan's emotional response, Eastman proposed an immediate training session in Aikido right there. The two stood face to face and began their practice, a meditative process in itself. Eastman is truly an exceptional master. Not only did he teach Morgan martial arts, but he also pulled him out of his emotional turmoil. At that moment, a zombie emerged from the woods. Morgan came over and used his Aikido skills to face his first real fight. However, when he looked closely, he realized that the zombie was the child he had strangled before, triggering a flood of memories. Eastman saw Morgan standing still and rushed to his rescue. Unfortunately, tragedy struck as Eastman got bitten by the zombie. After killing the zombie, Eastman calmly looked at his wounds without any hysterical accusations, not even a mention of. Instead, Morgan's angry shouts revealed his concern. Eastman just said calmly, "Let's go home." However, Morgan, consumed by grief, didn't want to return. The master and disciple fought once again, with the predictable outcome. Eastman packed his things, preparing to leave, while still trying to encourage Morgan to break free from his past. After a while, Morgan resumed his old habit of wandering in the woods with his spear. Soon he finds a zombie and quickly kills it, inadvertently saving a couple in the process. However, he remained on guard, clutching his spear. The woman, visibly frightened, gestured for him not to attack and then took out a can of food and a single bullet from her backpack. It was clear that those were all they had left.
Thank you.
Those 3 words softened Morgan's gaze, and the essence of Aikido appeared in his mind. He returned to the previous location and picked up the staff Eastman had given him. Now, the most important thing was to check on Eastman. When Morgan arrived back at the cabin, he found that the zombies had devoured the goat, leaving him feeling disheartened. Carrying the goat's body, he went to the graveyard. Eastman, upon seeing this, felt a touch of sadness but quickly found solace. Morgan returned the small book to Eastman and kindly advised him to take a rest. Fearing exhaustion later, they then went back to the house. Eastman, aware of his limited time, entrusted his lucky item to Morgan and offered him some words of blessing. The next day, Morgan packed his belongings and set off. This mentor awakened him with his own life and imparted the final lesson to him. Morgan also inherited Eastman's spirit of not killing people. He walked for who knows how long and never went insane again. Aikido had given him faith. Along the railway, he saw an advertisement for the end station and later arrived at a church, obtaining a map. This is what saved Daryl,